How's it going, folks? Welcome to another fun at-home table read. Tonight, we are going to jump into a true odd 80s classic, Fright Night. This one, I have a soft spot for it. It's one of my favorite vampire movies, but we're just going to jump right into it. Let's see who we have in our cast.
Of course. Hi, I'm Jen, and I'm seeing description.
I'm Erik.
Hello. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I wrote it down wrong.
I'm Erik. I'll be Charley.
I'm Angie, and I'm playing Amy.
I'm George, and I'll be Peter Vincent.
And I'm Travis. I'll be playing Evil Ed.
I'm Logan. I'm going to be Jerry Dandridge.
I'm Anne, and I will be Judy.
And I'm Rudy, and I'm Billy, not the vampire.
All right, well, Jen, take us away.
Fright Night by Tom Holland, not Spidey. Fade in, exterior full moon night, and credits roll. Clouds obscure the starless heavens for a moment, heavy and ominous in the black firmament. Then suddenly they clear, exposing a full moon, streaked with red like a killer's face. A stalking moon, staring down at a man's evil on the earth below. A howl breaks the night, a wolf pursuing its prey perhaps, or perhaps something much, much worse. Voices break the perfect stillness.
What was that?
Just a child of the night, Jonathan. Come sit here beside me on the veranda.
It's chilly out here.
Oh, no, it isn't. It's beautiful. I love the night so.
Yeah, you do. Exterior Rancho Corvallis night. A middling-sized town lost somewhere in the southwest. The lights of its 60-some thousand residents twinkling like so many Christmas lights in the night.
I've never seen you so beautiful before, Nina. So pale, so luminescent. So...
He suddenly stops. There is a moment, and then...
Yes?
Your lips are so red.
Are they? Would you like to kiss them?
Get him! The camera starts to pushing closer and closer on the town as though searching for the source of the voice. Exterior Charley Street, night. It's a typical middle-class suburban street full of pre-World War II houses. The substantial places they built then, 2- and 3-story homes with attics and basements, porches and detached garages. There is a sound of a long, drawn-out kiss as Jonathan and Miss Nina's lips meet. The camera moves down the street, still looking for the voices. Exterior Dandridge and Brewster House, night. The camera pauses to stare at the Dandridge house, so different in look and feel from all the other houses on the street. It's huge, almost foreboding. Its windows dark and vacant, its lawn overgrown and weed-infested, a home that has obviously been untended for a long time, unlived in, and uncared for. However, the for sale sign on the lawn has a sold sign just beneath it. The camera pans to the Brewster house next door, still searching for those voices. It's in sharp contrast to the Dandridge house, newly painted, its lawn neatly shorn. A house almost dwarfed in comparison to the Dandridge house, but a happy home, its windows lit and smiling out warmly at the night. The voices seem to be coming from the Brewster house, specifically from a dark second-story window that is open to the night breeze.
Why are you looking at me so strangely, Nina?
Not you, Jonathan. Your neck. Has anyone ever told you it was beautiful?
No.
Come, lay your head on my breast.
The camera slowly starts to push in on the second-story window. Interior Brewster house, Charley's bedroom night. The camera moves through the window, past the billowing drapes to find itself staring at a TV, the flickering screen, the only light in the room. One of those terrible AIP Hammer horror films is on the tube. A woman, obviously a vampire, talking to one of those vapid juveniles, and used so much in these type of films, and the two of them standing on a veranda to some huge old house. The young man rests his head against her breast. incredibly enough, unaware that she is bending towards his neck with these huge fangs. Yeah, baby! Just as she is about to sink them into his jugular, a tall saturnine man steps out of the darkness wearing a rather daffy Victorian suit and carrying a stake and a mallet in his hand. His name is Peter Vincent.
Stop, you creature of the night!
The vampiress leaps to her feet, her hapless intended victim forgotten. She faces Peter with a hiss, her fangs sparkling in the moonlight.
Who are you to interrupt my nightly feeding?
Peter Vincent, vampire killer!
So freaking classy. He rushes her, the stake held high to plunge into her breast, and the camera turns away from the TV as the sounds of the movie crossfade with the sounds of heavy breathing, lips meeting, tongues intertwining in the room itself. Only the room, a typical teenager's lair, seems devoid of life. You know, the bed empty, school books untouched, sitting on the desk. The camera begins to search the room looking for the source of this new sound. Much more interesting than the old flick on the tube. And then it finds them. Charley Brewster and Amy Peterson, two 16-year-olds on the floor to the far side of the bed, wedged between the bed and the window. They are both as American as their jeans and making out like crazy. They twist and turn on the floor, Amy alternating between enjoying it and fighting Charley off. Oh no. Both of them white hot with their mutual need. As he tries to slip his hand under her blouse, she catches a glimpse of the TV. The horror movie has faded out to be replaced by the interior of a local TV studio. A tacky graveyard set the centerpiece. The visage of Peter Vincent, much older now, rising out of a papier-mâché coffin and filling the screen as credits end.
This is Peter Vincent, bringing you Fright Night Theatre. Tonight's journey into horror is Blood Castle, one of my favorites. And for a very good reason. I star in it.
He does this booming laugh. Yas! That goes through about 10 echo chambers as Charley, totally oblivious to the TV, works on Amy's bra, trying to get it undone. Obviously something she doesn't want. She tries to distract him.
Charley, Peter Vincent's on.
Yeah, Peter Vincent.
But you love him.
Love you more.
Behind them, the station break segs into a commercial. A bunch of kids singing and dancing joyfully to a Coca-Cola commercial. On the floor, Charley finally gets Amy's bra undone. That's it for her. She twists away.
Charley, stop it.
Ooh, Charley, he doesn't listen. He's going for her again, their fingers fighting behind her back. Hers trying to get the bra re-snapped, his trying to keep it undone and get her blouse off at the same time. She suddenly away really hard this time.
Charley, I said stop it.
Charley rolls over, leaping to his feet, frustrated as hell.
Jesus, give me a break, Amy. We've been going together for almost a year, and all I hear is, Charley, stop it.
They stare at each other angrily, both of them breathing hard, their young hormones roiling inside them. And they look away, not wanting to see the other's anger, staring at the TV for lack of a better place to look. The horror movie is on again. Peter Vincent and Jonathan now carrying a coffin across a fog-swept cemetery. Charley back at Amy, his features softening.
I'm sorry, Amy.
She rises, both of them standing by the open window, staring at each other.
Me too. I'm just scared, that's all.
He nods understandingly, touched by her honesty and innocence, his basic decency winning out over his lust. Yay! Suddenly she steps into his arms, kissing him as she never has before. She breaks, staring up into his face nervously.
Let's get into bed.
You mean it?
She nods, stepping into his arms again, kissing him like he's never been kissed before. The two of them slowly turning, Charley seeing the TV first with its grave digger scene, then the wall, and then finally out the window over Amy's shoulder. And he freezes. There, below in the side yard, he sees two shadowy figures carrying what looks very much like a coffin toward the storm doors to the Dandridge house next door. His mouth drops open as Amy slips out of his arms and onto the bed, completely unaware of what he's seeing. She starts to take off her blouse, Charley no longer looking at her, his gaze glued to the weird scene he's seeing out his window. As her blouse comes off, she lays back in bed, looking up at him, waiting for him to join her.
Charley, I'm ready.
He ignores her, grabbing his binoculars from the desk, whipping them to his eyes and focusing in on the figures below. They're too dark to make out clearly, but they are Jerry Dandridge, and Billy Cole. An errant beam of moonlight hits the large oblong box and Charley gasps. It's a beautiful piece of work, a huge, ornate, obviously incredibly old, and bound in brass. Amy stares at Charley with rising confusion and irritation.
Charley, I said I'm ready.
Maybe you're not going to believe this, but there are two guys in the yard below. I think they're carrying a coffin?
Sure, and they're on the moors, right?
Amy, I'm serious.
So am I. Do you want to make love to me or not?
Charley is still peering through the binoculars, the two figures below having gotten the storm doors open and now carrying the coffin into the basement of the house next door.
Amy, quick. Come here. You got to see this.
All he hears is his bedroom door slamming shut. He whirls to find Amy gone. Tossing the binoculars on the bed, he dives after her.
Amy!
Interior portico stairway, living room night. Charley hurries down the stairs after her.
Okay, maybe it wasn't the coffin, but I did see two guys carrying something into the house.
I don't understand you. First you want to make love, then you don't.
Yeah, girl. They reach the bottom of the stairs only to have a voice from the living room stop them.
Amy? Charley, what's wrong?
They stop, turning to stare through the doorway at Charley's mom, Judy Brewster, sitting in the living room watching the 10 o'clock news on the downstairs TV. She's a young 40, pleasant looking and warm. Amy steps into the living room, Charley following, the two of them trying to pull themselves together so Charley's mother won't notice what they've been doing upstairs. Interior living room night.
Oh, have you two been having a lover's spat?
No, Mom, nothing like that. No, Mom, nothing like that.
Oh, sorry, I scanned too far down. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Right here it says that the divorce rate is 76% higher among couples who don't argue before marriage.
Mom, we're in high school.
Oh, yes, that's right. Well, it never hurts to plan ahead. Tell your mother I said hello, will you, Amy? Oh, and remind her we're playing bridge at her house this week. I'm bringing the cheese puffs and she's making the dessert.
Yes, Mrs. Brewster. Good night, Charley.
Yeah, good night.
But he's no longer listening. He's moving towards the window that stares out the house next door, at the house next door. There are lights on in the first floor now. Behind him, Amy turns back to his mother.
Well, good night, Mrs. Brewster.
Good night, Amy. Oh, and thanks for helping Charley.
Anytime. See you tomorrow, Charley.
Charley hears her staring out the window. Miffed again, Amy turns and stomps out of the room, the front door heard slamming behind her a moment later. Judy turns to her son. See what's wrong with him? He's at the window, staring at the house.
Charley, that wasn't very nice, not walking Amy to the front door.
Mom, there are people next door.
Oh, God, the new owner must be moving in.
What new owner?
Oh, didn't I tell you? Bob Hopkins told me he finally sold the place.
To who?
I don't know. Just some fellow who fixes up houses, he said. It's supposed to be attractive, too. Anyway, I just hope wherever he is, he knows that he's getting into with that house. It's a lot of work to just make it livable.
And the camera leaves behind, slowly pushing in tighter and tighter on the TV Judy was watching, their voices fading out to be taken over by the newscaster droning away on screen.
And now for the local news. A man was found murdered tonight behind the railroad yards. Details are pending, waiting notification of next of kin.
Fade to black, fade in on interior high school hall day. Kids are flooding out of the classrooms, the bell having just rung. Charley comes out of one of them, holding a test paper and looking none too happy about it.
Bastard. Why didn't he tell us he was going to spring up a pop quiz?
Another kid comes out right behind him, holding a test paper with a big A+ on it. His name is Evil Ed Thompson, and he's tall and thin with a terrible complexion and a personality to match.
That's the point to a pop quiz, Brewster. To surprise you.
Charley glances up at that moment to see Amy walking by, her head held high and looking in every direction but his.
Hey, Amy.
She keeps on going. Disappearing into the crowd, Evil Ed throws a look at Charley and cackles.
What's wrong? She finally found out what you really like?
Buzz off, Evil.
Call me anything you want. Only you're the one failing algebra, not me.
Well, you're failing English, apparently. So anyway, with another
Hey.
high-pitched laugh, he walks off. I love you, Travis. Leaving Charley staring after Amy miserably. Dissolve 2. Exterior Brewster and Dandridge House Day. Charley pulls his red beater 68 Mustang into the driveway. He gets out carrying his school books and heads for the front door. Just as he bends down to pick up the evening paper on the walk, a cab pulls up and a young woman gets out. Charley stops cold. She is definitely one of the most spectacular girls he's ever seen. Obviously sexy, cheap around the edges, but no less spectacular for it. She looks at him like a little girl lost. Is this 99 Oak?
No, next door.
She nods her head in thanks and walks towards the front door, next door house. That one where he saw 2 men carrying what looked like to be a coffin into the basement. It's a 3-story house like Charlie's, but that's where the similarity ends. The Brewster house is newly painted and well lived in. The Dandridge house has long been abandoned. The lawn overgrown, paint flecking from its side, the entire place run down and forlorn. Charley watches the girl disappear into the Dandridge house, whistling appreciatively under his breath. Nasty. He turns to his own front door. Interior Brewster house kitchen day. Charley enters the kitchen to find his mother preparing dinner. He hands her the evening paper.
Oh, thanks.
Charley stops by the kitchen sink, staring out at the Dandridge house as his mother goes back to fixing dinner.
Hey, Mom. You seen the new guy next door yet?
No, but I did hear he's got a live-in carpenter. With my luck, he's probably gay.
No, I don't think so.
Why? What do you know about it that I don't?
Oh, nothing. Gotta study. See you later.
He cuts a beeline for the door. His mother staring after him disbelievingly as he disappears out the door.
Study? You?
Way to go. Dissolve 2, interior Charley's bedroom night. He's hard at work at his desk, really into his algebra, when over his shoulder a light comes on behind the drawn shade of the bedroom window of the house next door. It is directly on a sightline with his own room, but he doesn't see it, staring intently at his books. Suddenly, a woman's scream, high-pitched and terrified, shattering the night. Charley whirls, sending his books crashing to the floor, staring out his window at the lit window in the house next door. The light snaps out, darkness blanking the entire wall of the Dandridge house. Charley just stares at it, trying to repress a shiver. All thoughts of studying algebra suddenly gone. Dissolve 2, interior mall fast food joint day. It's the after-school hangout, a bunch of tables before a fast food joint on the 4th floor of a shopping mall. Kids mill about, nearby video game machines going full blast, a TV playing The Young and the Restless on the counter. Charley sits at one of the tables, almost falling asleep, face down in his cheeseburger and fries as he tries to study. Suddenly, Amy slips in beside him.
Hi.
Oh, hi. Look, I'm really sorry about the other night.
It was my fault, not yours.
It was? Look, Amy, I love you. I never want to fight with you again, okay?
God, I'm so glad we're getting this straightened out. I've been so miserable the last 2 days. You don't know what it's been like.
Over her shoulder, he suddenly sees that the TV is gone to the local news. A picture of a girl who looks very much like the one he saw going into the Dandridge house the afternoon before on the screen. He is suddenly no longer listening or looking at Amy, his complete attention on the TV. She trails off as she realizes she's lost his attention, staring at him.
Charley, are you listening to me?
He gets up abruptly and walks away, leaving her sitting there, staring after him. He stops below the TV, staring up at the newscaster's voice, runs over the picture of the girl.
Charlene, a known prostitute, was found murdered this morning.
Thanks for casting me as a prostitute. Evil Ed steps up beside him, staring up at the screen, along with him.
You know what I heard on the police band last night?
What?
That wasn't the only murder. It's the second in 2 days. And get this. Both of them had their heads cut off. Can you believe it?
You're sick.
A voice suddenly comes from behind him.
Charley?
He turns and she mashes this cheeseburger into his face, whirling on her heel and stomping off, leaving him standing there dripping onion rings, mashed bun, and partially eaten ground round, mustard and ketchup. All of the kids looking at him and laughing. Evil Ed steps up to him, cackling in his ear.
You're so cool, Brewster. I can't stand it. Oh my god.
Charley ignores him, staring after Amy as she disappears into the elevator. Dissolve 2, exterior Brewster house day. The Mustang pulls into the drive and disappears into the garage. A moment later, Charley appears, walking toward the back door, the Dandridge house next door looming over him. He slowly stops, studying it, his mind going back to the night he saw the long, oblong box being carried into the basement. He suddenly sets his books down and heads for the side yard between the two houses. Exterior side yard day. He walks the distance to the storm doors, stopping above them, staring down at the handles. One quick glance around tells him the coast is clear, the Dandridge house seemingly deserted. He bends down to grab the handles, and suddenly a voice stops him.
Hey, kid, what are you doing?
Charley jerks erect, staring at the back corner of the Dandridge house. There stands Billy Cole, mid-30s, huge, with a face that looks like it's never smiled. Charley backs away from the storm doors.
Nothing.
See that it stays that way, kid.
Billy disappears around the side of his own house, leaving Charley staring after him, suddenly covered in a cold sweat. Dissolve 2, exterior Brewster and Dandridge house night. The two houses sit there side by side, only the Dandridge house has changed, although it's hard to say exactly how. It just seems more worse than before. More worse? Jesus. Worse than before. More abandoned. More hulking. More dead. Interior Charley's room night. Charley has the house next door staked out. He sits in the chair before his window, all the lights off in his room, only the flickering TV to keep him company. It's Peter Vincent on Fright Night, another one of his films on. This time, the volume turned off. Charley holds his binoculars in his hand, staring at the dark window of the house next door, waiting. Dissolve 2. Interior Charley's room much later that night. The TV is just flickering snow now, the channel having signed off hours before. Charley still sits in front of his window, but he's sound asleep, breathing deeply, lost in his dreams. Soft, sensual music snakes through his open window, enveloping him slowly and dragging him awake. Groggily, he opens his eyes to find himself staring into the lit window of the bedroom next door. He sits up with a start. There's no drawn shade now. He can see clearly into the room, and a beautiful teenage girl with long blonde hair stands there framed in the window, slowly taking her blouse off. Jesus, come on, 80s. Charley rubs his eyes, hardly able to believe what he's seeing. As he watches, she drops the blouse to the floor and stands there just bare-breasted. Charley gulps, fumbling for his binoculars. Probably fumbling for something else, too. Anyway, he gets them to his eyes just as Jerry Dandridge steps out of the shadows behind the girl, gliding across the room toward her with incredible grace. Come on, nudity! To Charley, the whole thing has a dreamlike quality. Jerry more an impression than a reality. He's 30, maybe, almost beautiful with alabaster skin and chestnut hair. He stops behind the girl, sweeping her hair back, exposing her tender young neck. He slowly leans down as though to kiss her. As Charley watches through his binoculars, unable to tear his eyes away, Jerry Dandridge's upper lip slowly begins to pull back, revealing just the hint of fangs, long, razor-sharp, and sparkling pearly white in the moonlight. Suddenly, Jerry Dandridge stops. The fangs poised an inch above the girl's throat. He slowly raises his head, staring out the window across the side yard and into Charley's bedroom. It's almost as though he can see the boy watching him. With an involuntary gasp of terror, Charley steps back into the deeper darkness of his room, his hand instinctively reaching up to protect his own throat. Jerry Dandridge slowly reaches up and pulls down the shade, cutting off all view into the room. Charley stands there for a moment, unable to believe what he just saw. The binoculars slip from his hand, crashing to the floor, and he whirls, racing out of the room. Interior his mother's room night. He bursts through the door to find his mother sound asleep. In bed, he grabs her, shaking her awake.
Mom, you gotta get up. I can't believe what's happening next door.
What? What are you talking about?
Fangs. The man who bought the house has fangs.
Oh, Charley, I have to be at work at 7 tomorrow.
We hear a car door slam in the yard next door. He jumps to the window, peering out into the back of Dandridge house, just in time to see Billy Cole walking away from a shiny new black Cherokee Jeep, its back door left open. Charley whirls and dashes out of the room, leaving his mother staring after him.
Charley?
Exterior second floor hall, night. He races down the corridor for the stairway landing. Interior stairway, portico, night. He pounds down the stairs, taking them two at a time, whips around the newel post, and flies down the hall toward the kitchen. Exterior backyard, Dandridge house, night. Charley slips out his back door and through the darkness into the adjoining yard. There, among the clump of bushes, he crouches down, watching the black Jeep. The rear door is open as though to receive some burden. The yard empty. Billy Cole no longer there. Suddenly, the back door to the Dandridge house opens again, and Billy comes out carrying a large bundle in a plastic trash bag over his shoulder. Charley's mouth falls open as he realizes the bundle could easily be a woman's dead body. Billy dumps it in the back of the Jeep and slams the door, crossing in front of the vehicle for the driver's door. Suddenly, there is a terrific whoosh through the air over Charley's head, the moonlight momentarily blotted out, the beating of large wings above causing the bushes around him to bend and sway. It's almost as if a huge bird, a bat perhaps, just swooped over his head from the top floor of the Dandridge house, and then silence returns. Charley lifts his head, peering about in the distance, darkness, just in time to see a shape more a shadow than a man step out of the darkness no more than 10 feet away. It's Jerry Dandridge. He glides towards the Jeep, tossing Billy a woman's purse.
Here. You forgot this.
Billy one-hands it out of the air, turning back for the Jeep. Just then, the back door to Charley's house bangs open, sending a shaft of light into the darkness. Judy Brewster stands there in the doorway, calling to her son.
Charley!
Dandridge
Charley!
and Billy Cole freeze. They freeze, both of them turning to look at the back door to the Brewster house, inadvertently staring right at the clump of bushes where Charley is hiding. Dandridge takes a step forward, his eyes probing the darkness as though he can actually see through the murky blackness, right to where Charley hides. Terrified, Charley suddenly leaps to his feet and races back into his own yard, disappearing through the back door with his mother. Billy steps forward as though to follow the boy. Jerry puts out a restraining hand, stopping him. Dissolve 2, interior Charley's house, kitchen, night. Charley sits at the kitchen table, his mother putting a cup of hot cocoa in his hand.
Here, drink this.
Mom, I don't need hot cocoa. I didn't have a nightmare. They did kill a girl over there.
Charley, how late did you stay up studying?
Mom, I'm not sick. The guy did have fangs and a bat did fly over my head. And then Jerry Dandridge stepped out of the shadows. You know what that means, don't you?
What?
He's a vampire.
A what?
Match cut to interior Amy's house, kitchen day. Amy's staring at him much as his mother did, with a look of shock and total disbelief on her face.
Oh, what?
Vampire, damn it. Haven't you listened to anything I've said?
Charley, is this some kind of trick to get me back?
Forget it. I'm going to the police.
Charley, you can't go to the police with a story like that. They'll lock you up.
All right, then I won't tell them it's a vampire, but I sure as hell am going to tell them about the two women.
Charley.
He slams out the back door, leaving her staring after him, worried sick. Dissolve 2, exterior Dandridge house day. A police car pulls up, Charley in a red Mustang behind him. He gets out, walking to meet Lieutenant Detective Lennox. A tall man in his early 40s. He hitches his pants, staring at the teenager hard.
You sure about this, kid?
Charley nods emphatically, and the cop turns towards the house, Charley following. Interior Dandridge house, portico, stairway, day. The knock reverberates through the silent house. Nothing for several seconds. Then, the sound of someone walking down the hall from the kitchen. Billy Cole appears, stopping before the door, staring through the curtain at the dim outline of Charley and the detective. Standing on the porch. He opens the door, staring at the boy and the cop.
Yes? Mr. Dandridge? No, I'm his roommate, Billy Cole. Lieutenant Lennox, homicide. Mind if we come in? No, not at all.
He steps back from the door, allowing them to enter. The house is a mess of cardboard moving boxes and heavy Victorian furniture scattered everywhere, a number of the pieces still under white dust covers. Clocks line one wall, none of them working, all set at 6 p.m.
Is there anything I can help you with? There was a murder last night. Charley lives next door and thinks he saw the victim in this house. That's impossible. I was here with Jerry all last night. There was nobody else in the house.
That's a lie. I saw him carry her body out in a plastic bag.
What do you say to that, Mr. Cole? The kid's crazy, officer. I did take some bags out there last night, but they were full of trash. Here, let me show you.
Into crates, boxes, and furniture. He holds up a plastic trash bag stuffed with wrapping paper and cardboard boxes.
See? We're just in the process of moving in.
It's all had a body in it, not trash.
Did you actually see the body, Charley?
No, but
Look, let me take you out back. I'll show you the bags I put in the garbage. Okay. Let's see them.
He takes a step to follow Billy out of the room when Charley, increasingly desperate, stops him.
look, I can prove he's lying. Let's look in the basement instead.
What's down there? Yes, Charley. What's down there?
Charley meets the big man's gaze and finds his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. The seconds tick past. Still nothing from Charley. Billy turns to the lieutenant with a smile.
Obviously, the boys made a mistake, officer.
A coffin. That's what's down there. A coffin. I saw him carry it in.
What?
Yeah, and you'll find Jerry Dandridge in it, sleeping the sleep of the undead.
What are you talking about?
The vampire! I saw him in that room last night. He had fangs and he bit her on the neck.
Oh, for Christ's sake! Come on.
But
No buts.
Interior portico day. He opens the door and turns back to Billy, still holding Charley by the arm.
Sorry about this, Mr. Cole. Anytime.
The cop hustles Charley out the door, Billy closing it behind them, watching with a smile as Lennox hustles Charley down the walk. Exterior Dandridge house day. Charley looks up as Lennox shoves him towards the car.
I tell you, Jerry Dandridge is a vampire.
Sure, and I'm Dirty Harry. Now, you listen to me, kid. If I ever see your ass down at the station house again, I'll throw it in jail forever.
He hops in his car, slamming the door behind him as Charley hovers by the window.
Lieutenant Lennox, please, listen to me.
Lennox ignores him, roaring away in a cloud of burning rubber. Charley stares after him, not knowing what to do now. He hears the porch door of the Dandridge house open behind him and whirls to find himself staring at Billy Cole, standing on the porch, looking back at him, a toothpick in his mouth. There's something very unpleasant in the big man's eyes, like murder. Charley slowly backs away from him towards the car, Cole's eyes following him. Charley glances down at his wristwatch. It's 4 p.m. He glances up at the sun overhead. It's beginning to sink. Late afternoon, and all that implies drawing nigh. He looks back at Billy, and the man is smiling at him now, reading his thoughts. Charley leaps into his car and takes off down the street. Cut to interior Evil Ed's house, portico stairway day. Charley bursts through the front door and pounds up the stairs, yelling as he comes.
Evil!
Interior Evil Ed's bedroom day. Evil Ed sits at his desk, hand painting a monster model of a ghoul as Charley bursts through the door and skids to a halt before him, breathing hard. Evil's room is a veritable museum of horror, movie posters of Frankenstein and the Wolfman dotting the wall, the shelves full of monsters' models, the floor littered with horror comics. Evil glances up at Charley, obviously not happy about being disturbed.
And to what do I owe this dubious pleasure?
The vampire knows that I know about him, or at least he will when he wakes up tonight.
What are you talking about?
I've got a vampire living next door, and he's going to kill me if I don't protect myself.
What?
Look, Evil, I've got time. I haven't got time to explain. Just tell me what to do to protect myself.
Very funny, Brewster. Always funny.
I'm not kidding, Evil. Please just tell me what to do.
Why should I help you? And please don't call me that.
Look, I've got $8. Tell me what to do, and it's yours.
Evil Ed stares at the money for a moment and then sweeps it into his pocket.
Fair be it for me to turn down a fool's money. Where and when do you expect this vampire to attack?
In my bedroom tonight.
Evil Ed puts down his brush and pulls a dime store cross from his desk. He hands it to Charley.
Start with this. Of course, you have to have faith for it to work. Then get some wolfbane and...
What?
Forget it. Get some garlic, links of the stuff you can wear around your neck, and hang from your window. If he comes for you, that'll be the way. Then, of course, there's holy water, but you need a priest to say a blessing over it first.
He goes back to his painting. Charley stares at him.
That's all?
I'm afraid so. Of course, they can change into wolves and bats at will, and I don't know what you do about that, but your best protection right now is that a vampire can't enter your house without being invited by the rightful owner first.
You sure about that?
Positive.
Smash cut to interior Charley's bedroom night. Charley steps back to stare at his window. Finished at last. He's done the best he can, nailing it shut, strewing it with garlic, his chest of drawers shoved in front of it, partially blocking it. The cross Evil Ed gave him sits on his desk. He tests the window. It's secure. His mother calls up to him from the portico below.
Charley, come down here, please. There's someone I want you to meet.
He turns and walks out of the room, feeling better now. Interior portico, stairway, night. He bounces down the stairs and turns towards the door to the living room. Interior living room, night. He walks into the living room to find his mother standing there, a drink in her hand.
Yeah, Mom?
Charley, this is our neighbor next door, Jerry Dandridge.
Charley freezes. Jerry Dandridge sits in the best chair, a drink in his hand, smiling at Charley. He's even better looking close up, almost blindingly beautiful. Too much so, actually. There's something disturbing about it, as though such good looks have to cover up an inner putrefaction. Some sort of hidden, sweet, sickly rot just beneath the perfect pale skin. He rises, the smile widening as he sees the terror in Charley's eyes. He holds his hand out as Judy watches her son for his reaction.
Hello, Charley.
Charley just stares at him.
Shake hands, Charley. There's no reason to be rude.
Charley slowly crosses to Jerry and takes his hand, shaking it as one would the hand of a recently disinterred corpse. Disinterred? Corpse. Judy smiles, pleased with herself.
What's he doing here?
Invited him over for a drink.
You what?
Invited him over. Why?
Charley turns back to stare at Jerry. Jerry smiles, speaking in a voice that flows like honey, charm and nascent sensuality oozing every pore.
What's wrong, Charley? Afraid I'd never come over without being invited first? You're quite right. But of course, now that I've been made welcome, I'll probably drop by quite a bit.
His voice changes, suddenly charged with double meaning, his eyes burning into Charley.
In fact, anytime I feel like it. With your mother's kind permission, of course.
Of course, Jerry. You're welcome anytime. It's so nice. Someone interesting has finally moved into the neighborhood. It's so dull around here. I mean, how many nights can you play Trivial Pursuit? Right, Jerry?
Right, Judy.
Charley watches this scene, backing across the room, terrified. He suddenly hits an end table, knocking it with a crash to the floor. Judy looks at him. He's ghost white.
Charley, are you
Yeah,
alright?
fine. I just gotta go get back to my trigonometry, that's all.
Nice meeting you, Charley. See you soon.
And unseen by Judy, he looks directly at Charley and winks at him. Charley whirls, bolting out of the room and pounding up the stairway, out of sight. Judy looks to Jerry.
You know, our town really isn't as boring as I make it sound. I mean, for instance, there's a dance at the church first Friday every month.
Really?
Really.
Jerry smiles a secret smile and takes a sip of his drink. Interior Charley's bedroom night. He bursts through the door and scoops up the phone, punching out a number frantically. Cut to interior Evil Ed's bedroom night. He is still at work, painting the monster model of the ghoul. The phone rings. He picks it up.
Yeah?
The vampire is in the house. My idiot mother just invited him over for a drink.
No shit.
Cut back to interior Charley's room night.
And this is serious.
You still have my cross?
Yeah, and I nailed my window shut.
Then relax. There's no way he can get to you.
You sure?
Cut back to interior Evil Ed's bedroom night. I wouldn't actually listen to him.
Positive. Now, good night. I've got some studying to do.
Ugh. Studying. Travis. He hangs up, returning to painting his monster model of the ghoul, mumbling to himself.
No. Fucking idiot.
Cut back to interior Charley's bedroom night. Charley grabs the cross off of his desk and nervously fingers it, turning to stare out his window at Jerry's window next door. The shade is pulled, but there's a light on behind it. It doesn't make Charley any less nervous. Dissolve 2, exterior Dandridge and Brewster house night. Both houses sit quietly on the street, wrapped in the darkness of the night air, and an ordinary enough image, 2 houses sitting there, but there's something disturbing about it. After a few seconds, one realizes what it is. The Dandridge house almost looks like it's about to pounce on its next-door neighbor, the Brewster house. Interior master bedroom night. Judy is sound asleep, a light breeze wafting through the curtains of her partially open window, sleeping mask over her eyes. Interior second floor hall, night, darkness and silence, and nothing else but moonlight spilling through the window at the far end. Interior Charley's bedroom night. He sleeps fitfully in his chair, his door locked behind him, his window barricaded with his desk. Interior second floor hall night. Suddenly, the shadowy outline of what might be a huge bat swoops past the window outside, followed by the beating of mighty wings. A second later, something is heard landing on the roof with a heavy thud. Interior Charley's room night. Charley sits bolt upright in his bed as he hears it, listening hard. But now, there's nothing but silence. He stares up at the ceiling, listening and waiting. Then he hears what sounds like footsteps walking across the roof, and then silence again. Grabbing the cross and holding onto it tightly, he walks towards his door. Interior hallway night. He unlocks the door and pokes his head out, looking up and down the hall. Nothing. Then he hears it, a noise from the floor below. It sounds like fingernails scratching across glass. He tiptoes to the landing, staring down at the enshrouded portico below. The noise is louder now, spookier, more insistent. Clutching his cross, he starts down the stairs. Interior master bedroom night. Jerry Dandridge stands above Judy, staring down at her, sleeping peacefully in her bed. The window behind him is now fully open. He glides across the room past Judy's bureau with her wig sitting on it. Yes, girl, work. Pats the wall mirror without leaving a reflection to mark his passing, and out the door with unnatural silence. Interior hallway night. Jerry closes the door behind him, giving it a sharp tug that slightly dislodges it from its hinges, wedging it tight against the frame. It's something no man of ordinary strength could accomplish that easily. He turns away, gliding across the hall towards the open door to Charley's bedroom. Interior stairway, portico night. Charley stands on the stairs, staring through the doorway into the living room. There is nothing but shadows in there, and then he sees it, the source of the scratching sound. A tree branch, caressed by the wind, is slowly moving back and forth across a pane of glass in one of the French doors to the patio. Relieved, Charley slips the cross into his pants pocket and turns, walking back up the stairs. Interior hallway night. He walks down the hall past his mother's bedroom, hardly giving it a glance as he disappears into his own room. Interior Charley's room night. He shuts the door softly behind him, locking it, sits, turns on the TV, rising again nervously, and turns to find himself facing Jerry Dandridge. He opens his mouth to scream. The vampire's hand whips out with blinding speed and seizes him by the throat, choking off all sound.
Now, we wouldn't want to wake your mother, would we, Charley? Then I'd have to kill her too, right?
Charley nods, and Jerry flings the boy the length of the room with inhuman strength, slamming him into the far wall. Charley slips to the floor, all the air knocked out of him. Jerry advances on him as Charley fights to get his breath back.
You realize the trouble you caused me? Spying on me, almost disturbing my sleep this afternoon? Telling policemen about me?
He reaches down and grabs the boy, jerking him erect and slamming him again against the wall. Again! Charley's legs dangling several feet above the floor. Jerry leans in, pressing his face close to Charley's.
You deserve to die, boy.
And he begins to slowly choke Charley, suddenly stopping, staring into the boy's face.
Of course. I can give you something I never had. A choice. You forget about me, and I'll forget about you. What do you say, Charley?
For an answer, Charley suddenly whips the cross from his pocket, holding it up to thrust in Dandridge's face. Jerry's other hand snaps out and grabs Charley by the wrist, holding the hand with the cross as far away from him as he can and beginning to slowly apply pressure.
It's not that easy, Charley. I have to see it.
Charley's face writhes in agony as Jerry threatens to pulverize his wrist bone with the sheer strength of his hand. The cross slips from his numb fingers and falls to the floor. Jerry stares furiously at Charley. Charley staring back, terrified.
You'll kill me. Everybody will be suspicious. My mother, police.
Not if it looks like an accident.
Still holding him by the throat, Jerry releases his wrist and yanks the bureau from the window, slipping the lock and throwing it full open, easily tearing the nails meant to hold it shut from the wood frame.
All, for instance.
He starts to slowly, inexorably push Charley out the window. The boy cranes his neck, glancing over his shoulder. The hard ground is a good 30 feet below. He turns back to the vampire, fighting for a handhold, grabbing the window frame with one hand, his desk leg with another, trying to keep himself from being pushed back first out the window. But Jerry is too much for him, the vampire's strength making him seem puny by comparison. His fingers begin to slip from their hold on the window frame. His other hand starts scrabbling blindly across the desktop, searching desperately for a handhold. Nothing. Then his fingers suddenly wrap around a pencil, and in desperation he brings it up, slamming the point down into the hand that holds him by the throat. With an unearthly scream, Jerry whirls away from him, grabbing his hand in pain, the pencil protruding from the back of it, smoke rising from where the wood has pierced his dead skin. He grabs the pencil with his other hand and jerks it out, flinging it across the room, slowly raising his head to stare at Charley. The face is no longer human. Judy can be heard rattling her bedroom door in its frame, trying to get it open. Jerry's head whips back and forth between the door to the hall and Charley, the sounds of Judy struggling to get her bedroom door open becoming louder and louder all the time. The door across the hall starts to give with a groan. With a hiss of frustrated fury, the vampire whirls, throws open Charley's door, and dashes out into the hall. Charley throws off his shock at still being alive and plunges after him. Interior hall night. Charley skids to a halt in the hall, sees the window at the far end is flung open wide, and dashes to it. Sticking his head out and staring up at the night sky. Suddenly, on the roof above him, there is the sound of powerful wings beating away into the night air, and then nothing. He slowly pulls his head back in and closes the window behind him, locking it. He turns to find Judy stumbling out of her room at last and staring at him.
Charley, what happened?
I just had a nightmare.
Oh no. I had one last night, all right? It was this white sale, and there I was, standing at the counter, and I reached for my credit cards only to realize I was naked as the day I was born.
Suddenly, they both hear a dull thud as if metal is bending. Then, nothing. Judy stops, turning back towards a closed window as Charley peers towards the glass, seeing the shadowy form of Jerry Dandridge slipping out of their garage and crossing into the backyard of his own house.
Now what's that?
She takes a step for the window, only to have Charley grab her, gently guiding her back towards her bedroom.
Nothing, Mom. Just the raccoons in the garage again. Why don't you go back to sleep?
But what about your nightmare? Do you want a Valium?
I'm fine now.
It's her.
Fine now. Honest. Night.
Well, I do need my sleep. I'll start the night shifts tomorrow.
Yes, Mom. Yes, Mom. I know. Good night.
He pushes her through the door, I'm sorry guys, into her bedroom, closing the door behind her and turning for his own bedroom. Interior bedroom night, Charley closes the door behind him, clicking on the TV for company, hardly looking at it as he paces the room, lost in thought. It's Fright Night again, another horror film on. It's the last thing he needs to see, and he is about to lean over and turn it off when the phone suddenly rings by his side, making him jump. He picks it up, but doesn't say anything, just listening at the receiver. Suddenly he hears Jerry's sibilant whisper.
I know you're there, Charley. I can see you.
Charley slowly turns, staring out his window. There, in the window of the house next door, stands Jerry Dandridge, the phone to his ear, staring at Charley. Interior Dandridge house, Jerry's bedroom night. Jerry stands at his window, staring back at the horror-struck visage of the boy in the window of the house next door, while Billy kneels at his side, solicitously bandaging his injured hand.
I just destroyed your car, Charley. But it's nothing compared to what I'm going to do to you tomorrow night.
He hangs up, slowly reaching out and drawing the shade. Interior Brewster house, Charley's room night. Charley watches the shade blank the lit window out. He slowly hangs up the phone, sinking onto the bed, thinking hard and coming up with no answers. On the TV, the horror flick dissolves as Peter Vincent comes on doing a station break rap.
Hello, horror fans. I hope you're enjoying Eye of Vampire Part 2. It's one of my best. Did you know a lot of people don't believe in vampires?
Charley straightens up, his gaze suddenly riveted to the screen.
But I do, because I know they exist. I have faced them in all their guises, men, wolves, bats, and I have always won. That's why they call me the Great Vampire Killer. Now, watch me do it.
The horror flick comes back up on the screen, a much younger Peter stalking Dracula through a drafty castle, stake and mallet in hand. As Charley watches the movie with renewed, if not fervent, interest. Whispering to himself as he watches.
Get him.
Dissolve 2, exterior studio parking lot day. Peter comes out of the studio dressed in his street clothes, moping towards his car, taking a cigarette from his cigarette case as he goes. He's in his 50s, tall, saturnine, by nature very theatrical, but at this particular moment in time, also very depressed. Charley jumps out from hiding and hurries towards him.
Hey, Mr. Vincent?
Oh no, Peter ignores him, continuing to walk towards his car as Charley falls in beside him.
Can I talk to you a minute? Please, Mr. Vincent, it's terribly important.
Peter abruptly stopped, resigned to the fact that this boy is not going to let him alone. He whips out a fountain pen.
All right, what do you want me to sign?
Pardon me?
Well, you want my autograph, don't you?
No, sir. I was curious about what you said last night on TV, about believing in vampires.
What about it?
Were you serious?
Oh, absolutely. Unfortunately, none of your generation seems to be.
What do you mean?
That I have been fired because no one wants to see vampire killers anymore, or vampires either. Apparently, all they want are demented madmen running around in ski masks, hacking up young virgins. Now, if you'll excuse me.
He starts for his car again, Charley falling in beside him.
I believe in vampires.
That's nice. If only there had been more of you, perhaps my ratings would have been higher.
In fact, I have one living next door. Would you help me kill him?
That stops Peter cold. He turns and stares at the boy.
Pardon me.
You know the murder of that girl that happened yesterday?
Yes.
Well, the guy who lives next door did it, and he's a vampire.
A moment, and then Peter turns away angrily.
If this is your idea of a joke, I am not amused.
Vincent, I'm not joking. Deadly serious.
Peter stares at him, sees he means it, and decides Charlie's crazy. It makes him decidedly nervous.
I'm sorry, you'll have to excuse me.
Mr. Vincent, I'm telling you the truth.
Peter stops before his car, an outrageous old clunker, and fishes out his keys.
You said you believe in vampires.
I lied. Now leave me alone.
He opens the door only to have Charlie slam it shut, staring at Peter desperately.
Please, you have to listen to me. The vampire tried to kill me last night and trashed my car when he didn't succeed. He'll be coming back for me tonight. And if I don't help, I don't get help, he's gonna kill me.
Peter shoves him aside, hopping into his car, quickly locking the door behind him, obviously terrified of Charlie. As he starts the engine, Charlie beats on the window.
Vincent, you gotta believe me.
Peter backs up, hauling ass, bless you, out of the lot, Charlie running after him.
Sir Vincent!
He comes to a halt, realizing it's useless, standing there watching as Peter disappears out of the lot and down the street. Cut to exterior Brewster House day. Amy rides up on her moped just as Evil Ed starts up the front walk towards Charlie's house. She dismounts, looking at him.
What are you doing here?
Me? What about you? I thought you just dumped him.
What I'm doing here is none of your business.
And you do like him.
He disappears into the house right behind her. Interior Brewster House portico stairway day. Amy and Evil Ed push open the door and step inside, Amy yelling up the steps.
Anybody home?
No answer. Nothing but silence. She and Evil Ed exchange glances, then start up the steps. Interior Charlie's room day. Amy and Evil Ed walk through the door and stop, gaping at what they see. The room has been transformed from a normal, happy kid's room into an armament camp for vampire assaults. The window is nailed shut, strands of garlic, a dozen at least, hung from the curtains. Dime store crosses and crucifixes are everywhere in every imaginable shape and size. Charlie sits in the middle of the floor, whittling a steak from a slat of grape fence, a hammer by his side.
What's all this for?
Self-defense. Not that I think I'll need it. I'll be dead before nightfall.
Who will be?
Dandridge. I'm waiting for the guy. I'm waiting for the guy. He lives with Leave, and then I'm gonna go next door, find his coffin, and pound this through his heart.
He holds up the steak. Evil Ed and Amy look at it, horrified.
That's murder, Charlie.
You murder a vampire, Amy. You're already dead, remember?
Charlie, you're acting crazy.
I don't have any choice, Amy. The police won't listen to me. My mother thinks I'm crazy. You too. Even Peter Vincent thinks I'm nuts.
You actually went to Peter Vincent?
Yeah, Dandridge has to be stopped. Listen, I just taped this.
He hits the play button on his stereo Dolby tape deck, and a local radio newscast plays over the speakers.
And now for the 2 o'clock news. Another body of a young woman was discovered early this morning in the back of Sheraton Mall.
He hits the stop button and turns back to them.
See? After he attacked me last night, he went out and had his dinner. No, I don't have any choice. Somebody has to stop him. Hold on, I need another steak.
He rises and disappears out the door into the hall. Evil Ed turns to Amy, truly frightened for the first time. He whispers to her.
What are we going to do? If we don't stop him, he's actually going to try to kill this guy. What with a stake through the heart?
I know.
I don't believe this. It's like Fright Night.
That's it.
What?
We get Peter Vincent to prove to him that this Dandridge guy isn't a vampire.
How are we going to do that?
I don't know, but we better figure out a way if we don't want to be just visiting Charlie in jail.
Charlie enters from the hall, carrying another slat of wood to be sharpened. Evil Ed and Amy fall silent as he takes a seat by the window and goes back to his whittling.
Charlie, it's going to be dangerous going into that house alone, isn't it? You're going to need all the help you can get, right? Somebody like Peter Vincent, for instance.
Told you, I already tried him.
Why not let us try before you do anything?
Why should he believe you any more than he did me?
Maybe we're better talkers.
That chance.
What happens if you go into that house alone and he gets you? Who's going to stop him then?
Yeah, then he'll be able to suck his way through the entire town. Not that it would be much of a loss.
I don't know.
Charlie, it'll be dark soon. You don't want to go into that house then, do you?
No, you're right there. All right, try him again.
Great. Now, you promise you won't do anything until you hear from us? Okay. Come on.
Evil Ed hurries out of the room, Amy following him. Charlie calls after her.
Amy. You don't believe me, do you?
I love you, Charlie.
She doesn't believe you. She turns and hurries out of the room. Interior Dandridge house, portico day. Billy stands at the window, peering through the curtain at Amy and Evil Ed as they hurry out of Charlie's house and start down the street. He glances at his watch. It's 4 o'clock, another good 2 hours before dusk begins to fall. He turns and stares thoughtfully up the stairway in the direction of the attic. Cut to interior apartment day. Peter lets himself into his efficiency apartment carrying a handful of mail. The place is small but neat, the walls dotted with posters of his various movies, all in the horror genre, stretching back at least 3 decades. The bookshelves and table are dotted with memorabilia, props, and awards from his various roles. He stops by the table, going through the mail. There are bills and more bills, many marked last notice, one of them in order to vacate this apartment within 3 days for failure to pay rent. Suddenly, there is a knock at his door, and he goes warily to answer it. He opens it to find Amy and Evil Ed standing there.
Yes?
Could we talk to you for a moment, Mr. Vincent?
I'm afraid now isn't the best time.
Please, it's terribly important.
He stares at her and sees the desperation in her eyes. He steps back, closing the door behind him and following them into the room.
Now, what can I do for you? An autograph or an interview for your school newspaper?
I'm afraid this is much more important.
Oh, really?
I know you're a very busy man, Mr. Vincent, but we're trying to save a boy's life.
Well, yes, I see where that could be more important. Would you care to explain yourself?
You remember a fruitcake kid named Charlie Brewster? He said he came to see you.
No.
He's the one who thinks a vampire is living next door.
Oh, yes. He's insane. Oh, dear me. I hope he's not a friend of yours.
She's got the huts for the creep.
She flushes and smacks Evil Ed, making him yelp. Damn it, Travis. She turns back to Peter.
We need your help to stop him, Mr. Vincent. You see, he really does believe his ex-door neighbor is a vampire. He's planning to kill him.
Yeah, with a stake through his heart.
Peter stares at them for a moment.
Are you too serious? Well, my dear, your friend needs a psychiatrist, not a vampire killer.
Please, Mr. Vincent.
I'm afraid not, my dear. You see, Hollywood beckons. I've been offered a starring role in a major movie. I've even had to quit Fright Night. So you see, I'm afraid.
I'll hire you. I'll give you money.
How much?
I have a $500 savings bond.
I'll take it. Now, how are we going to cure your little friend of this delusion?
I got it all figured out. We all go next door to the neighbor, and you run some kind of vampire test on him and pronounce him human, like in Orgy of the Damned. You know where you looked in the mirror and the guy didn't have a reflection and then he knew he was a vampire?
Yes, that was one of my favorite roles. I still have the prop.
He pulls out a silver cigarette case and flips it open. The inside of the lid is a mirror. He suddenly snaps it shut and slips it back into his pocket, looking up at them.
Well, it sounds fine to me, but how do we get the next door neighbor to it?
Leave that to me.
Nobody glances out the window as Evil Ed picks up the phone and dials 411, but if they did, they'd see night has fallen. Cut to interior Dandridge House portico stairway night as the camera watches all the clocks on the wall begin to tick, signaling dusk has fallen and Jerry is awakening. Camera pans off the clocks to the phone on the portico table. It rings. Billy appears down the hall from the kitchen. He picks it up.
Yes.
He listens as to what must be the attic door is heard creaking open on the floor above. Billy turns and stares up the stairway as Jerry appears out of the darkness, slowly walking down the steps. Billy holds the phone out to him.
It's for you.
Jerry takes it.
Yes? Yes, this is Jerry Dandridge. I see. Yes, of course. I'm always willing to help young people. But I'm afraid crosses won't do. You see, I've been reborn recently.
He smiles at Billy. Billy smiles at him. Cut back to interior Peter's apartment night. Evil Ed cups his hand over the receiver and turns to Peter as Amy watches.
He's a reborn Christian. He thinks crosses would be sacrilegious.
Ask him how he feels about holy water.
How about holy water?
Oh.
Won't do either.
Tell him it'll just be ordinary tap water. All he has to do is take a sip.
Evil Ed turns back to the phone. Cut back to interior Dandridge House portico night. Jerry listens into the phone while Billy watches.
Yes, that sounds fine. Only, don't come over till 6 tomorrow. I'll be out until then.
He slowly hangs up and turns to Billy.
It seems we won't have to go out tonight after all. His friends are bringing him over tomorrow night to prove that to him that I'm not a vampire.
Billy smiles. So does Jerry. Dissolve to exterior Brewster and Dandridge House night. Evil Ed and Amy drive up in a cab, hopping out and hurry up the walk toward Charley's house. Interior Charley's house night. Charley sits in the dark, a razor-sharp wooden stake in one hand, a hammer in the other. He's dividing his attention between the window and the door. There is a knock at the door. He raises the stake, ready to defend himself.
Who is it?
It's me and Amy, stupid. Open up.
Charley opens the door and lets them in. Amy throws herself into his arms, almost dancing around the room in her joy.
Charley, Peter Vincent said he'd come.
You did?
Tomorrow
When?
at 6.
But Dandridge will be out of his coffin by then.
Relax. He's Peter Vincent, the great vampire killer. He must know what he's doing, right?
I don't know. Maybe he didn't take it seriously.
Oh, he did, Charley. He did.
Honest.
Honest.
Maybe we really have a chance to kill Dandridge tomorrow night. You two don't know what it's been like knowing that there's a vampire living next door and having no one believe me. And
It's all right, Charley.
She takes him in his arms, holding him close as Evil Ed turns away in disgust, staring out the window at the darkened window next door. Interior Dandridge House, upstairs bedroom night. Jerry sits in the dark, rocking back and forth in a chair, staring out the window into Charley's room, catching just the dim outlines of the 3 kids in the house next door. He smiles. If anybody saw the smile, they'd run screaming in the opposite direction. Dissolve to exterior Dandridge House, dusk into night. The 3 teenagers, Charley, Evil Ed, and Amy, stand in front of the house waiting. Dusk is slowly gathering, the shadows lengthening as night closes about them. Charley glances nervously at his watch.
6:10. He said he'd be here at 6, right?
Relax. He said he'll be here. He'll be here.
Peter's old clunker appears around the corner. Amy is the first to see it.
Here he comes.
The kids rush the car as Peter pulls up.
Vincent, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this.
Peter slowly gets out of the car, stretching to his full height. He wears his vampire killer regalia, the Victorian suit, and carries a small leather satchel. There is something truly majestic about him. He looks down at Charley, laying it on with a trowel.
Charley Brewster, I presume? Peter Vincent, vampire killer. And now down to business. Where is the lair of this suspected creature of the night?
There.
Ah, Yes, I see what you mean. There is a distinct possibility.
He opens the satchel, withdraws a small crystal vial of water, slips it into his jacket pocket, closes the bag, and replaces it on the front seat of his car. He locks the car and turns back to the kid, straightening his shoulders.
Well, shall we?
Where's your stakes and hammer?
I left them in my bag.
You're not going in. You're not going in there without them.
I have to prove he's a vampire before I kill him, Charlie.
But I know he's a vampire.
But I am the one that has to know, Charlie. This is holy water. If it touches him, he'll blister. And in this case, I asked him to drink it while we all watched. He readily agreed.
He did?
Yes. Which doesn't exactly strengthen your case, does it? Now, shall we go?
He takes a step up the walk. Charlie grabs his arm.
Mr. Vincent, if I'm right and you prove he's a vampire, he'll kill us all right then and there.
No, he won't, Charlie. Not with me here to protect you. After all, I'm Peter Vincent.
He starts up the walk, Amy and Evil Ed following him. Charlie runs after him, increasingly desperate.
Mr. Vincent, you don't know how powerful he is. He can change into a bat and fly through the night.
Well, and Peter stops on the porch, knocking on the door, listening to the boy with half an ear.
Of course, Charlie, of course. But then he's never dealt with me before either.
But
Billy Cole opens the door, his face lighting up when he sees Peter. He shakes his hand warmly.
Mr. Vincent, Billy Cole, this is a pleasure. Won't you all come in?
He steps back and Peter, Evil Ed, and Amy enter the house. Charlie has no choice but to follow. Interior Dandridge house, portico, night. Billy turns and yells up the stairs, all the clocks behind him ticking madly, the hour 6:30 p.m.
Hey, Jerry! They're here!
Several seconds pass. Nothing happens. Peter turns to Billy.
Perhaps he didn't hear you.
Oh, he heard me all right.
Suddenly, a step creaks at the top of the staircase where the shadows are at the heaviest. Slowly, Jerry Dandridge walks down the stairs into view. First his elegant shoes, then his legs with their fashionable pants, and finally the rest of him, all beautifully turned out. His handsome face stares down at them as he makes his entrance. Yeah, Travis, shut up. You don't get to do that. See, that was a good one. Anyway, there is something truly majestic about him, both incredibly attractive and yet frightening at the same time. Jerry reaches the bottom of the stairs and turns to Peter with a blinding smile.
Ah, Mr. Vincent. I've seen all your films and I've found them very amusing.
Oh, why, thank you.
And who might these two attractive people be?
Ah, this is Ed Thompson and Amy Peterson.
Charmed. Isn't that what vampires are supposed to do, Charlie?
Charlie scowls at him. The others laugh. Jerry turns to the living room.
Please, come in.
He ushers Peter into the living room, Billy following. Amy and Evil Ed stare after Jerry, both totally captivated.
God, he's neat.
She follows him into the living room. Evil Ed shoots Charlie a disgusted glance.
Some vampire, Brewster.
He follows the others. Left alone, Charlie has no choice but to join them. Interior living room night. Jerry looks around at the packing crates and few pieces of dusty furniture and turns back towards the others.
You'll have to excuse the mess. I'm still unpacking.
where'd you keep the coffin? Or do you have more than one?
Charlie.
It's quite all right, Mr. Vincent. I'm used to it by now. As you may or may not know, Charlie even brought the police over a few days ago.
Peter, Amy, and Evil Ed all look at Charlie, shocked.
Charlie, you didn't.
Damn right I did. Only the cops didn't believe me any more than any of you. But you'll believe me in a few seconds. Mr. Vincent, give him the holy water.
Charlie, there's no reason to be rude about this.
It's perfectly all right, Mr. Vincent. Where is the holy water?
Peter withdraws the vial from his pocket. Jerry eyes it warily, staring at Peter, his voice suddenly heavy with double meaning.
Are you sure that's holy water, Mr. Vincent?
Positive. I saw Father Scanlon bless it down at St. Mary's myself.
Jerry takes the vial from his hand, pulling the stopper and sniffing at it. For the first time, nervousness creeping into his manner. Charley sidles up to Amy, whispering in her ear as Jerry prepares to drink the water.
Get ready to run. I'll protect you with this.
He edges a cross out of his pocket, just giving her a glimpse of it. He glances up at just as Jerry lifts his head back and downs the contents of the vial in one swallow. He turns to Peter triumphantly.
There. Satisfied?
Oh, totally. Charley, you saw it. Are you convinced now that Mr. Dandridge isn't a vampire?
Charley stares at Jerry and this vial, stunned almost into speechlessness.
It can't be.
You just saw it, Charley. You know as well as I do that no vampire could drink blessed water.
That it wasn't blessed.
Are you calling me a liar, young man?
Charley looks at Jerry. Jerry stares back at him, smiling. Charley suddenly whips the cross out of his pocket and holds it up.
She's not a vampire. Have him touch this.
Jerry stiffens, his face losing its color, but none of the others notice. They're all looking askance at Charley. Peter steps up to the boy.
Charley, you've already made a fool of yourself once. There's no reason to compound the error.
Yes, Charley. You've already caused your friends quite enough pain. You don't want to cause them any more, do you?
Charley sees Dandridge coiling to spring, Billy sliding into blocking the doorway to the portico. The tension level in the room is suddenly unbearable. Peter, Amy, and Evil Ed are aware of it, although they don't know the reason. Charley slowly edges the cross back into his pocket.
No, of course not.
And you're finally convinced I'm not a vampire either, correct?
Their eyes lock. A moment passes, then finally...
Yes.
Jerry smiles at him and the tension suddenly flows out of the room. Billy even smiles. Jerry steps forward, ushering them all toward the portico.
Well, that's all settled.
Interior portico night, they all stop before the front door. Billy in the background. Jerry turns to Peter.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate this, Mr. Vincent. You've been a great help.
Not at all, Mr. Dandridge. Glad to be of service.
Jerry ignores Charley, turning to Amy and Evil Ed as Peter steps back, reaching into his coat pocket for his cigarette case.
It's been very nice meeting both of you. Please feel free to drop by anytime. You'll always be welcome.
I'd like that, Mr. Dandridge.
Well, please, call me Jerry.
Get it, girl. Her face is beginning to stiffen, her eyes turning blank. Charley looks at her in sudden alarm, remembering the girl he saw through the window that night. He grabs Amy by the arm, tugging her toward the door.
Well, let's get out of here.
Just a minute, Charley.
Smiling, Jerry turns to Evil Ed as behind them all Peter opens his cigarette case, takes out a smoke, about to tamp it down on his thumbnail when he glances at the mirror on the side of the lid. He sees Amy, Evil Ed, and Charley grouped around where Jerry Dandridge should be standing, but he's not there. It's as though the kids are talking to thin air.
The same goes for you, Ed. I expect we have many of the same interests. You know, in such things as horror movie and the occult.
Peter's head jerks up and he looks at the doorway. Now he sees Jerry standing there talking to the kids. Peter looks back down at the mirror again. No, Jerry. His face goes chalk white. His mouth gasps for air and he drops the case from his Pazed? I don't know. Pazied hands. They're white. Anyway, it smashes to the hardwood floor with a crash. Everyone turns and looks at him.
Something wrong, Mr. Vincent?
Peter hurriedly scoops up the case, trying to hide his shaking hands and keep the tremor out of his voice.
No, just my clumsiness. Come along, we must be going. Thank you again, Mr. Dandridge.
He ushers the teenagers out the front door as Jerry watches, puzzled by his sudden change in attitude. Exterior Dandridge house night. Peter plunges down the walk to his car, the kids hurrying to keep up with him. Charley looks at him.
What's wrong with you?
Nothing.
He stops by his car, fumbling his keys out of his pocket. He's hardly able to fit them into the lock without his trembling hands, or with his trembling hands.
Why are your hands shaking?
They're not shaking.
He finally gets the car door open, hurriedly sliding in behind the wheel, slamming the door behind them. Charley leans down, speaking through the partially open window.
You saw something in there, didn't you? Something that convinced you he was a vampire.
Will you be quiet?
Is Jerry Dandridge a vampire or not?
No, of course not.
Please, Mr. Vincent, you have to tell me. Our lives depend on it.
All right. He didn't cast a reflection in my mirror. Satisfied now?
You have to call the police and tell them.
The engine finally catches and he roars away in a cloud of burning rubber, Charley watching him go, half frustrated to death.
Shit!
Interior Dandridge House, portico night. Billy and Jerry peer out the window, watching the kids walk away from the house.
I could teach her so much.
What?
Nothing.
Jerry turns away from the window, sits at the foot of the stairs.
Well, at least they'll never believe the kid now.
Jerry glances down and sees a sliver of mirror from Peter's cracked cigarette case at his feet. He picks it up, examining it. He casts no reflection in it. He holds it up for Billy to see.
No? Let's go.
He grabs his leather jacket and moves down the hallway towards the back door, Billy quickly following.
Yeah.
The kids are walking down the street away from the Dandridge house as the camera cranes up to follow them as they recede into the distance, the darkness slowly swallowing them up.
Well, at least you two heard him.
Heard who?
Peter Vincent. He said Dandridge had no reflection.
Probably just a trick of the light.
You felt how evil Dandridge was, didn't you, Amy? Like, remember the way he looked at you?
Yes, sort of.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
He turns, about to duck between two houses.
Where are you going?
Home, it's dinner time.
Wait a minute, like, we walk Amy home first.
Why?
Because it's after dark, Pencil Dick, and there's a vampire out there.
He points back at the Dandridge house. Evil Ed just stares at him.
Oh shit, Brewster, you are certifiable. You know that? I shall say that again. Oh shit, Brewster, certifiable. You know? Oh, okay.
City Street. They all start down the street together again, growing smaller and smaller until they disappear into the darkness. Cut to Exterior City Street night. The town of Rancho Corvallis is middling size, perhaps 100,000 people. There are several tall buildings around, not many, but enough. Street lamps cast pools of bright light and deep shadows everywhere. There are a few pedestrians out, a few cars passing by, but once again, not many. The three kids walk down the street. Evil Ed stops before the open mouth to a shadow-encrusted alleyway.
Let's go there. Here.
No way. We want people. We want people and lights. The more, the better.
One more time.
Look, Bruce, vampires don't exist. Haven't you gotten that through your thick head?
Well, what if you're wrong, Evil? What if Dandridge is a vampire? Well, what if you're wrong, Evil? What if Dandridge is a vampire and he thinks you know it? Like, would you walk down that alley then?
The hair on the back of Evil Ed's neck starts to stand on end. Then he denies it.
Aw, fuck you, Brewster.
He takes a step toward the alley. Charley grabs him.
Ed, please, just stick with us.
Forget it. You may be chicken shit, but I'm not.
He disappears down the alley into the darkness. Amy and Charley stare after him. She turns to Charley.
What do we do?
Let him go. No vampire's going to want him anyway. Probably give him blood poisoning.
They're about to turn away when a blood-curdling scream echoes out of the darkness of the alleyway. It's Evil Ed. Charley and Amy dash headlong into the alley after him. Interior alley night. They speed through the darkness, skidding to a halt on the shadow-slick pavement, looking around.
Where is he?
Amy
Over
spots
here.
his... Oop, that's the thing. And then they go to him. They dash to him. They kneel by his side. He's crumpled against a wall. Evil Ed's eyes are closed, his breathing shallow. Charley tries to shake him awake.
Ed, you all right?
Nothing from Evil Ed. Charley looks to Amy.
Warned him.
Evil Ed's eyes suddenly snap open, staring up wildly at Charley.
He got me, Charley. He bit me. You know what you're gonna have to do, don't you? I turn into a vampire and...
He suddenly heaves himself at Charley, his mouth opening, going for his throat as Charley jerks back, terrified.
give you a hickey.
He suddenly lets Charley go, rolling on the pavement and laughing like a maniac. Perfectly all right. Charley springs to his feet, furious with him.
Asshole, you fucking asshole!
Same. Evil Ed rolls on the ground in hysterics, pointing at him and laughing loudly.
Ha ha ha, really fooled you. You really believe me, you poor dope.
You'll get yours someday, Evil.
He grabs Amy's hand and walks back down the alley toward the street and the lights. Evil Ed yells after him.
When I'm big vampire, there's no such thing as vampires, you fruitcake.
Still chuckling to himself, he turns in the opposite direction and disappears down the alleyway into the darkness. A moment passes, nothing but silence. Then Jerry Dandridge steps out from a shadowy wall where it would be impossible for any mortal to have concealed himself. It's almost as though he is materializing out of the night. He stares after Charley and Amy and then slowly turns to stare in the opposite direction after Evil Ed. He slowly walks in that direction. Exterior farther down the alley night, Evil Ed walks along feeling safe and secure, and then he hears it. Footsteps behind him, coming through the dark, slowly towards him. He turns and looks back.
Amy? That you?
He hears nothing but those footsteps getting closer and closer. The fear starts to work at him, twisting up his gut and making his forehead sheen with sweat. He steps forward, yelling out with false bravery.
If that's you, it isn't working. Scared?
And then Jerry emerges out of the shadows, smiling at him, and with a scream, Evil Ed turns and runs. Exterior further down the alley night. Evil Ed runs like he's never run before, pounding through the dark, smashing into traffic cones, and falling into the ground, leaping to his feet, ignoring his skinned hands and bruised knees, running for his life and knowing it. Exterior dead-end night. He suddenly skids to a halt, facing a brick wall. He whirls, his breath coming in ragged gasps now, peering down the alleyway into the dark, listening to those footsteps in the alleyway, getting closer and closer. He slowly backs away until he has no further to go, until his back is against a brick wall, until he's on the verge of hysteria.
No!
The footsteps suddenly stop. Nothing but silence. The seconds tick past. He takes a step away from the wall, peering into the darkness with something like hope, praying that maybe, Dandridge has given up. A voice suddenly whispers in his ear, no more than an inch away.
Hello, Edward.
Evil Ed turns with a scream to find Jerry standing right next to him, almost insane with fear now, slobbering like a wounded animal. He backs away from the shadowy figure, hitting a corner and sliding into the cold pavement, almost curled up in a fetal ball. Tears streaming from his eyes, Dandridge walks over to him, staring down with something like pity in his eyes.
You have nothing to fear from me. I understand what it's like being different. Only they won't make fun of you anymore or beat you up. I'll see to that. All you have to do is take my hand.
Evil Ed slowly looks up at him through his tear-stained eyes to see Jerry staring down at him, his hand outstretched to him, a slight smile on his face, gentle, seductive, beguiling.
Here, Edward. Take my hand.
Evil Ed looks down at the outstretched hand to his. It's beautiful, perfectly shaped with thin, elegant fingers, almost womanly. Bitch, everyone can have good nails! Anyway, the nails impossibly long, perfectly shaped, tapering to 5 gleaming, razor-sharp points. I was right, it was pointed. Alright, Evil Ed slowly reaches out and takes the vampire's hand. Jerry smiles down at him and slowly leans down, lifting him up into the last embrace Edward Thompson will ever know. Exterior street night. Charley and Amy walk rapidly down a street, heading toward Amy's home. He casts a glance at her.
How much further?
About 10 minutes.
A death rattle, long and high-pitched, suddenly comes to them, echoing through the city streets, down alleyways, and across apartment buildings, faint, yet filled with so much terror. It stops them in their tracks and leaves them staring fearfully about the shadows.
What was that?
Evil Ed messing around? Not funny, Evil!
Her voice bounces off the walls down the street and then dies, leaving them staring at the darkness and the shadows, fearful. Amy tries to act brave, turning to Charley.
Come on.
They start down the street again, Charley glancing nervously over his shoulder in the direction of Evil Ed's scream.
Maybe what if Evil really was in trouble?
Oh, come on, Charley. Don't let him suck you in again.
All the streetlights suddenly go out, plunging them into almost total blackness. Excuse me. They whirl, looking back now, down the turtle. No, totally down the total dark street. Shit. Damn it. Slowly backing away from the darkness. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Don't tell me it's a power outage.
I'm so sorry.
What else could it be?
Jen fucking up and ad-libbing. Charley stops, grabbing her, and nods to a light pole opposite them. She follows his gaze to see a power box on the pole, its front ripped open, the wires inside shredded. Before they can even gasp at the sight, they hear the sound of huge wings beating overhead. A huge shadow of a bat flies over the buildings, across the building wall opposite them. That's all it takes. They whirl, dashing down the street. Exterior, another street night. They come racing down a street under a bridge and start up the incline down toward the roar above. They turn onto the bridge, starting to cross it, slowing to a walk, breathing hard.
Really awesome.
Yeah. Charley, you were right about the holy water. We faked it. I'm just sorry I didn't believe you.
All right, Amy.
He kisses her, takes her hand, and they start walking up the bridge.
We've got it made.
And they freeze. They're high above them on one of the arches of the bridge, so high up that no one could possibly get there unless they flew. Stands Jerry Dandridge, staring down at them. With a scream, they whirl, racing off the bridge and down the street. They suddenly turn the corner, only to find that they are facing Jerry Dandridge, standing on the sidewalk directly in front of them, amused by the frozen expressions of horror on their face.
Run!
Eek grabs Amy's hand, the two of them whirling and disappearing around the street corner. Exterior, another street night. They race down the street for the far corner. Exterior, another street night. They whip around the corner only to skid to a halt. There stands Jerry Dandridge again, smiling at them. He takes a step towards them and they whirl, diving down a side street. Exterior side street, club radio night. They tear down the street, seeing the club radio, a fashionable disco, across the street. Its entrance is jammed with people trying to get in, all of them dressed to the teeth in new wave and neo-punk.
Over here.
Charley dives for it, dragging Amy after him as Jerry appears with around the corner, just behind them, walking towards them with a steady gait, relaxed, in no great hurry, hunter, unsure of his skill. Charley and Amy fight their way through the crowd until they reach the front door. A bouncer stands there, checking IDs and collecting the cover charge. He hardly looks down as Amy and Charley step up.
$5 a piece.
Charley frantically searches his pockets and comes up with change and nothing else. Amy pulls out a $10 bill and hands it to him.
Got it.
As Charley takes it from her, he glances over her shoulder and sees Jerry moving forward through the crowd towards them. He shoves the money at the bouncer hurriedly.
Here.
The man takes it and Charley grabs Amy, pulling her towards the door, watching over his shoulder as Jerry keeps coming closer and closer towards them. Suddenly, the bouncer reaches out and collars Charley.
Hey, just a sec. How old are you?
18.
Let me see some ID.
Charley glances back. Jerry is just an arm's length away now. A man suddenly shoulders him aside just as he's about to grab Charley and Amy.
Hey, wait your turn.
Jerry turns and stares at the man. Whatever the man sees in Jerry's eyes gives him the cold sweats, and he turns hurriedly away. Charley grabs Amy, using the moment to pull her away from the door and Jerry. The bouncer shouts after them, holding up the 10 spot.
Hey, what about your money?
Charley and Amy come out of the crowd, backing away from the door just as Jerry emerges, stepping after them. He's only 10 feet away now, smiling as he approaches, both kids realizing it's hopeless to run at this point. Backing away, Charley and Amy cross the mouth of an alley. There's the crash of a garbage pail, and Charley glances down the alley to see a dishwasher from the club dumping garbage, the bright lights of the door into the kitchen shining like a beacon in the night. Charley grabs Amy's hand and jerks her down the alley after him as he races for the door. Interior Club Radio Kitchen Night. He and Amy race through the madhouse of the kitchen, one of the cooks glancing up from chopping lettuce as they speed past.
Hey, you can't go in there!
Interior Club Radio Night. They burst through the door to find themselves in a packed video disco. 4 huge screens overlooking the dance floor, all of them playing Michael Jackson's Thriller. Charley and all of them, disappear in all the people. A moment later, the cook appears from the kitchen, signaling. I'm done. A bouncer circling the floor, keeping a wary eye for fucking trouble. Anyway, Charley and Amy fight their way through the sea of dancers. Charley looking about. He sees what he wants. A sign above the hallway reading restrooms and phone. He drags Amy in that direction. And at the corner of the dance floor, the cook can be seen gesturing to the bouncer, pointing in the direction the 2 kids took. Interior hallway night. They break through the crowd and down the short hallway to a bank of payphones opposite the restrooms. Charley digs a dime out of his pocket, drops it in, and dials. Amy screams at him to make herself heard above the din.
Who are you calling?
Ghostbuster. The police. Yeah, give me a Lieutenant Lennox.
Nice. Cut down. Cut to interior Peter's apartment night. There is a knock at Peter's locked and barred door. He slowly rises from his chair, the cross clenched in his hand, staring at it, terrified. The knocking comes again. Louder this time. He presses his lips to the door, whispering.
Who is it?
Me, Evil Ed.
What do you want?
There's a vampire out here. Let me in.
Peter slips the cross into his pocket and unlocks the door. He pulls Evil Ed into the room, hurriedly locking and barring the door behind him. Evil Ed has changed, and not for the better. His skin is more sallow, huge dark circles under his eyes, his lips bloodless, his collar pulled up tightly around his neck. Peter turns to him. Oh no.
What are we going to do?
What are you going to do? Not me.
Peter stares at him as Evil Ed slowly reaches up and pulls down the collar of his shirt, revealing 2 small puncture marks on his throat. Peter's eyes widen in horror. Evil Ed's smile only grows wider because he's evil fucking Travis.
Oh yeah, I have to say something. I used to admire you. You know that, of course. That was before I found out what a fake you were.
Yeah, he advances on Peter, looming over him. Peter standing up at the boy in growing terror. Evil Ed smiles at him, revealing 2 huge fangs. Peter leaps out of the chair, dashing for the door, fumbling to undo the locks and bars with trembling fingers. Evil Ed watches, his rictus grin just growing wider.
Vincent, the great vampire killer indeed.
He throws himself at Peter. Shut up, Travis. Grabbing him from behind and whirling him about, opening his mouth wide to sink his fangs into him. Peter straightens, grabbing the cross from his pocket and thrusting it directly into Evil Ed's face, slamming it into his forehead between his eyes. His skin sizzles and cracks, smoke rising, and Evil Ed backs away, bent over, screaming in pain, his hands held to his face. He slowly looks up as Peter watches, frozen in horror. Evil Ed drops his hands from his face, revealing a smoking sign of the cross branded into his forehead. He stares at Peter.
What have you done to me?
He turns to look into the wall mirror, but there's no reflection for him to see. He whirls on Peter, screaming at him like the spoiled brat that he is. Damn it, Travis.
What have you done to me?
Damn it, Travis! He takes a step toward Peter, and Peter thrusts the cross at him.
Back!
The master will kill you for this. Not fast, slowly. Oh, so slowly.
Oh, please don't ever say it like that again. Anyway, Peter advances on him, the cross held out in front of him with the shaking hands, backing Evil Ed across the room toward the window.
Back! I say back!
Evil Ed snarls at him like some trapped feral animal and suddenly whirls, throwing himself headlong out the window in an explosion of shattering glass. Peter rushes to the window, staring out at the street below. Nothing. He cranes his neck, peering at the heavens above. Nothing. He draws his head back in, leaning against the wall, gasping for breath, hand on his heart, feeling as if it's about to leap out of his chest with the horror of it all. Cut back to Interior Club Radio Night. Charley slams the phone back into its cradle in frustration, Amy looking at him worriedly.
He doesn't believe me.
I'm scared, Charley. I'm real scared.
I won't let him get you, Amy. I promise.
We haven't got a chance, Charley. Not the two of us against him. What about your mother? Call her.
Can't handle this, Amy. You got Peter Vincent's number?
Charley, he doesn't care about us. I paid him to be there today.
You don't have any choice, Amy. Now give me his number.
She reluctantly digs a scrap of paper out of her pocket as Charley drops another dime. Cut to...
What?
In his hand snaps out, grabbing Evil Ed and jerking him forward into the spill of light from the overhead street lamp. The sign of the cross is clearly seen on his forehead. Jerry stares at it in revulsion.
What is that?
He had a cross.
Fool!
He slams him back into the seat with so much force the crossbar that holds it in place bends. Exterior street, Jeep, night. Jerry leaps out of the Jeep, slamming the door behind him, Evil Ed and Jerry staring after him as he strides towards the entrance to the club. Interior Club Radio night. Charley stands at the phone, Amy beside him, watching anxiously as he listens to the phone ring on the other end.
Oh, Mr. Vincent, answer. Please, answer!
Unseen by either of them, Jerry Dandridge sweeps through the front door of the club, moving like a god among mere mortals, his eyes now glowing a faint red, sweeping the crowd of dancers as they move towards the dance floor. Interior Peter's apartment night. Peter sits in the dark, clutching a cross, trying not to shake as he watches the ringing phone, too terrified to answer. It keeps on ringing. Cut back to Interior Club Radio, hallway, night. Charley turns with his back to the dance floor and Amy shielding the phone with his body to cut down on some of the din, swearing to himself as he does so.
Answer me, damn it. Answer me!
Behind him, Amy stiffens, staring out onto the dance floor as the sea of people, moving through the dancers like a golden god amid mere mortals walks Jerry Dandridge. The hot colored lights of the dance floor highlight his hair, accentuating his gracefulness, making him seem even more beautiful than he is. He stops just at the edge of the dance floor and holds his hand out to Amy. I'm going to guess orgasmic dancing swirling on behind him? Orgiastic? Oh no, orgy. Okay, see, that's what Jen doesn't know anything about orgies. Anyway, orgiastic dancing swirling going on behind him. The pounding, sensual beat of the funk rock washing over them both. His eyes burn into hers, willing her to come to him. Jesus Christ, superstar. Terrified, she turns back towards Charley. In that moment, Jerry disappears from the mouth of the hallway, Amy turning back just as she's about to grab Charley, only to see that he's gone. She stops, more intrigued than frightened, the image of that beautiful man holding out his hand to her, sharp in her mind. She takes a step forward down the hall, continuing down the hall until she has a clear view of the dancers. Jerry's nowhere to be seen. Behind her, Charley is just about to turn and glance in her direction when a voice answers on the other end of the line.
Yes. Yes?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it. I'm so sorry, George. Charlie,
Yes?
shut up. Charlie cups one hand over his ear, bending down to hear better because apparently I can't either. Behind him, Amy slowly disappears down the hallway and onto the dance floor.
Mr. Vincent, this is Charlie Brewster. You gotta help us. Jerry Dandridge. Yeah, he has me and Amy trapped in this club.
Cut back to interior Peter's apartment night. Peter moves to the window, the phone in his hand. He slowly pulls back the curtain, peering down at the street below.
I'm sorry, Charlie. I can't do that.
You have to come, Mr. Vincent. You're the only one who knows what's going on.
You have to understand, Charlie. Ed's one of them now. He just tried to kill me. If I try to go out, he'll kill me for sure.
Cut back to interior club radio hallway night. Charlie is screaming into the phone, almost in tears.
You don't dare to kill us!
He's so into what he's saying on the phone that he doesn't even realize that Amy's gone. Cut back to interior Peter's apartment night.
I'm sorry, Charlie. I just can't.
He hangs up the phone, flattening himself back against the wall, terrified. Cut back to interior club radio hallway night. Charlie slams the phone down, turning to Amy.
God damn him, he won't help us.
Only Amy is gone! The hallway empty. Charlie rushes towards the dance floor. Interior club radio dance floor night. Charlie emerges from the hall, looking about in the crowd of people for Amy. Nothing. It's as if she's just disappeared into thin air. He plunges out into the crowd. In another part of the bar area, Charlie moves among the people, desperately searching for Amy. He passes the drunken teenagers, ignoring them as he suddenly bumps into a table. A man yelling up at him angrily.
Hey, watch out, asshole.
Charlie glances down to see the table of users grouped around their mirror of white powder. He moves quickly away, searching for Amy. He stops by the wall of posers, cruising everything that walks by. Excuse me. Asking a girl that looks from behind as though she might be his age.
Pardon me, have you seen a girl light-haired?
The girl turns to him, revealing herself as a woman well into her mid-40s, decked out like a teenager, Sylvia Miles 10 years ago, staring at him hungrily.
Forget her. Take me instead.
Don't do it. Don't do it. She reaches out to kiss Charlie, and he flees the crowd of flesh watchers, laughing at him as he goes. He moves along the wall of lesbians, stopping one, his desperation growing.
Looking for a girl?
Aren't we all, honey?
Abso-fucking-lutely, baby. Before Charlie can recover, a woman moves into her arms. Charlie, shocked and disconcerted, backing away until he bumps to a halt against a heavy metal biker, the kind of guy who's into Twisted Sister. The parody of biker throws of... Really? Okay, alright. Throws him to the floor for the insult. His friends, walking parodies of bikers, laughing at Charlie as he leaps onto his feet and backs away into the crowd. He breaks free of the packed humanity, stopping on the stairs. It is at that moment that he catches a glimpse of Amy on this dance floor, dancing with Jerry. He hurries down the stairs and onto the floor. On the dance floor, Amy moves with Jerry, their bodies locked together, slowly falling into his eyes, dancing slower and slower with him until finally she has no will left of her own. She is in love with him. It is at that moment that that she bends her head forward, laying it on his shoulder, exposing her neck to him, his eyes staring at the wall as they revolve around and around, Jerry bending down to kiss her neck, his mouth slowly opening. It is at that moment that Amy sees her reflection in the mirrors mounted against one wall, and she is dancing alone. Shocked back to her senses, she goes rigid in Jerry's arms, trying to pull him away from him, screaming at the music and the dancers stop.
Charlie!
Charlie! way. Sorry, I'm thinking of Kinky Boots as soon as I heard that. Anyway, across the dance floor, Charley hears her scream and pushes her way through his way through the sea of humanity, fighting his way to her side as where she stands with Jerry, once again caught in his eyes, slowly losing her will. Charley grabs Jerry by the shoulder, trying to pull him away from Amy.
Let her go.
Jerry looks down at him, smiling, mocking him as Amy sways in his arms, her eyes locked on his face.
What's wrong, Charley? Jealous?
He grinds his pelvis against Amy, dry humping her in front of Charley. Really? Okay, she throws her head back, her mouth opening in something close to ecstasy, her eyes glazed, staring up at him with adoration, giving herself to him as she cocks her head to one side, exposing her tender young throat. Charley goes crazy.
Filthy son of a bitch!
He swings at him only to have Jerry release Amy, catching Charley's fist in the palm of his hand easily. He stares down at the boy, smiling cruelly.
Shouldn't lose your temper, Charley. It isn't polite.
He tightens his grip, slowly squeezing Charley's fist. You can almost hear the knuckle bones grinding as Charley's face contorts in agony, driving him to his knees before Jerry. Charley looks up at him, tears of pain streaming down his face.
You can't kill me here.
I don't want to kill you, Charley. I want you to bring Peter Vincent to my house, just the two of you. That is, if you ever want to see Amy again.
He casually releases Charley, letting the boy drop to the floor as he disappears with Amy into the swirling mass of dancers. Charley leaps to his feet, ignoring the pain in his hand, and plunges after them. Charley breaks free of the swirl near the bar, looking everywhere and not seeing either of them. Suddenly, he's grabbed by a strong pair of arms. He looks up to find himself staring into the face of a huge black bouncer.
Let me go!
The man ignores him, calling back over his shoulder.
Hey, Donny, this is the one.
Another huge bouncer. The one that the cook talked to when Charley and Amy sneaked into the club steps out of the whirl, staring down at the boy.
Yeah, Tim. Where's your girlfriend?
Charley suddenly sees Jerry and Amy breaking through the throng, heading for the entrance. He points to them wildly.
That's it. That's her over there with the older guy.
Come on.
He cuts across the floor on a diagonal to intercept Jerry and Amy. The black bouncer dragging Charley after him in a steel grip. Jerry finally reaches the throng near a front door, starting to move through it with Amy when suddenly the two bouncers and Charley block his way. Donny jerks Amy out of Jerry's hand, passing her to the black bouncer, nodding at her and Charley.
Get the two of them out of here.
Jerry steps towards Amy, his face beginning to darken with rage, the music pulsating around them, people swirling on all sides.
He's mine.
Donny puts out his hand, stopping Jerry as the black bouncer drags Charley and Amy out the front door.
You want chicken, man? You go to some other club.
Jerry snarls. I can't with you, Anne. Jerry snarls, his eyes beginning to glow, his hair slickening back slightly. Sorry. It was slickening. Anyway, dumb. The hint of fangs beginning to protrude over his upper lip as rage overtakes him. He raises his right hand, holding it out in front of the bouncer's face as the man can clearly see what is happening. The nails on the forefingers pop out, literally elongating several inches in front of the man's eyes, growing into razor-sharp claws that sparkle in the overhead lights. The bouncer, terrified, screams for his companion.
Hey, Leon, get back here!
Toward the entrance to the club, Leon releases Charley and Amy, hustling back towards his buddy. Charley grabs Amy, pulling her closer towards the door.
Quick!
But it's too late already. Donny screams as the talons whistle through the air, tearing his throat out in one swipe, scattering blood everywhere, blinding several of the dancers swirling by, hitting people drinking at the bar, a couple necking in the corner, blood flying everywhere. Jerry steps around the corpse as it topples backward over a table of coke users, the bouncer's dead eyes staring up at them. Leon dashes up, lunging for Jerry. The vampire's hand snaps out, grabbing him by the throat, squeezing, driving those claws deep into the man's neck, holding him like a chicken and enjoying every second of his death throes, and then casually flinging him into the center of the floor, bringing the music and all of the dancing to a shrieking halt as this new group of people stare at another dead body. Pandemonium erupts throughout the club, people screaming and rushing for the exit, the fear contagious, all of them streaming through through a bottleneck of the hallway, leading towards the front door, turning it into a battleground of panic, terrified people, clawing and screaming to get out of the club. Close to the front door, Charley and Amy fight their way through the madness, trying to gain their way outside and to freedom as as behind them a wave of panicked humanity sweeps towards them.
Hold on to me.
Suddenly, Jerry steps out in front of them and sweeps Amy away from him, the crowd flowing around Charley and carrying him off into the opposite direction as he fights and screams to get back to her.
Amy.
But the sea of humanity is too much for him. It pushes him first away from them and then towards the front door, leaving him no choice but to go with it or be trampled. Exterior club radio night. Charley bursts through the entrance of the club just in time to see the black Jeep roaring away down the street. Evil Ed peering out the back window, grinning wildly at him, mocking him with his full set of fangs. Cut to interior Peter Vincent's apartment night. Peter is hurriedly packing, shoving the bare necessities into his suitcase, preparing to abandon his mementos of a lifetime in his rush to get out of town while he's still alive. There's a knock on the door. He looks up, terrified.
Who is it?
Charley Brewster, let me in.
Exterior apartment hallway, night. The door cracks open an inch, a chain across the latch. Peter peers out at him.
Are you one of them too?
What are you talking about?
Peter thrusts his arm across the track. Yeah, got it.
Here, grab this.
Charley does as he's told. Peter peers at his hand. No smoke. He hurriedly slips the chain from the door and pulls the boy inside. Interior apartment night. Peter relatches the door and hurries back to his packing. Charley watches him.
What are you doing?
Leaving.
Can't.
You want to bet? Watch me.
Peter closes the suitcase, hurrying for the door. Charley steps in front of him, blocking his path.
Dandridge has Amy. He'll kill her unless we come to his house.
Peter stops, staring at Charley, stunned. The blood drains from his face.
Oh my God. The police. I'll call the police.
No, they won't believe you. I've tried.
Peter collapses in a chair, staring blindly ahead.
Peter, it's just us. We're going to have to save Amy.
I can't. I was paid to be there today.
I know.
And you still want me to help you?
Yeah. You're Peter Vincent, the great vampire killer.
That's a character in a movie, Charley. That's not even my real name. And I'm terrified. I'm sorry, but I am.
Can't do it alone, Peter. And if you don't help, Amy is going to die. And me too, probably. Please, Peter.
I'm sorry, Charley.
Yeah.
He walks through the door, slipping quietly out of the apartment, leaving Peter staring miserable at the floor. Dissolved to interior Dandridge house, bedroom, night. Amy slowly regains consciousness, opening her eyes to find herself laying on the floor, Jerry Dandridge looming over her. She cowers back, looking about the bedroom.
Where am I?
Where you wanted to be. In my bedroom.
He reaches out a hand to her and she cowers back.
Liar, where's Charley?
You don't really care.
He hits play on the tape deck. Funk rock, hot and driving. Snakes out of the speakers. He turns back to her, holding out his hand. She looks away, then glances up, only to find herself trapped in his gaze. He starts to weave his way across the floor towards her. Every move a suggestion, an invitation, all of it somehow hypnotic. She stares at him, fighting to break free. Finally, she manages to turn her head away, staring at the floor, screaming at him.
Liar! I love him!
It doesn't faze him. He just keeps moving to the beat slowly. Oh, so slowly. Coming closer and closer to where she sits on the floor, his voice stroking her as he comes.
Am I lying, you mean?
He stops above her, leaning down, his voice a husky, post-coital whisper.
Am I?
And she's gone. His eyes drawing her in and swallowing her up, drowning her in their faint red glow. He holds out his hand to her. She slowly takes it, and he raises her up into his arms, moving in place to the music with her, smiling down as she stares at him blindly. He gently pushes her head down on his shoulder, exposing her tender young neck, and then he slowly bends down, his mouth opening to expose those two razor-sharp fangs with their alabaster cast, slowly, delicately sliding them beneath her skin. Her body arches, both arms pressing him to her, her body clinging to his, and then she screams, bucking under him like she's having something like a sexual climax. Only better. Oh, so much better. And just underneath her scream is this horrid, greedy, sucking noise. Jerry Dandridge, feeding. Cut 2. Sorry, I went full Legally Blonde. Anyway, exterior side yard of a house night. Charley walks through the darkness with cross and stake held in his hand, slowly approaching the Dandridge house with a side yard across the street. Not with, but also they have that too. It's fine. Anyway, the shadows loom up over him, the wind causing the tree branches to rustle, Charley growing more and more nervous with every passing round. All that too. Exterior Dandridge house night. Charley steps out of the darkness of the trees across the street from the Dandridge house, stopping to stare at it. The huge, silent, dark house no longer looks like every other house on the block. It seems to have assumed a life of its own and turned into a hulking, brooding monster, about to leap forward and pounce on him. Charley grips his stake and hammer, checks the cross stuck in his jacket pocket, takes a deep breath and squares his shoulders and starts the slow walk toward the Dandridge house. Through the trees he moves, into the shadows and darkness, across the street, closer and closer to that hulking, evil house. Suddenly a hand snaps out of the darkness, grabbing him by the shoulder.
What?
Peter Vincent, ready to battle with the undead.
Charley whirls to find himself staring into Peter Vincent's drawn face. He wears his Victorian suit, his whole demeanor that of his public persona, the vampire killer.
Peter, this is serious.
I am serious.
He drops to his knees, pulling an assortment of his movie props out of his leather bag.
Let's see. Stakes, hammer, crosses, flashlight.
What about Billy Cole? What's going to stop him?
Peter rises, holding up a pistol.
This, from Orgy of the Damned.
What if he's not human? Bullets aren't going to stop them then.
He walks around during the day, doesn't he? Then he's human. Let's go.
The two of them cross the street, heading towards the house which now seems to be staring at them, about to change them. Charge them, sorry. Charley glances at Peter.
Peter?
Not now.
But Peter isn't really paying attention to Charley. His eyes are on that malevolent-looking house, the house looming larger and larger above them as they get closer and closer. Peter begins to slow his nerve, draining away as the true evilness of a place begins to eat at him. He finally comes to a halt, starting at the house. Charley stops, looking back. Staring.
What's wrong?
Nothing at all.
He joins Charley, the two of them slowly walking towards the house again, Peter becoming more and more nervous the closer they get. Charley takes a step for the front door. Peter grabs him.
Are you crazy? Not through the front door. Let's go around to the back and sneak in.
The front door slowly swings open on a creaking hinge, seemingly of its own accord. Peter and Charley turn to look at it, a dark, gaping hole, like an open mouth ready to swallow them whole.
Too late.
He starts moving up the porch towards the door. Peter moves with him, his gaze fixed on the gaping mouth of an open doorway, mumbling to himself as he goes.
I'm Peter Vincent, the great vampire killer.
They disappear into the house, Jerry Dandridge suddenly stepping into frame, staring after them. Interior Dandridge house, portico, stairway, night. Charley and Peter stop and stare around in the darkness. Nothing moves, not even a shadow. Charley nods up at the stairs.
This way.
They start up the stairway. Exterior house night. Outside the house, the subjective camera watches them, craning past the front windows onto the side of the house, watching Charley and Peter through the windows as they mount the stairs, the camera slowly heading up the side of the house. Interior Jerry's bedroom night. Jerry appears outside his bedroom window. Floating there, he leans forward toward the window, about to climb in. Interior house stairway night. Peter suddenly grabs Charley, freezing as he hears that second-story bedroom window opening.
Did you just hear something?
No.
They start up the stairway. Peter grabs Charley again, digging his fingers into the boy's arms, listening hard.
Let's wait until dawn. He'll be in his coffin then. We'll have a better chance of getting even.
And you'll be dead by then too. Come on.
He turns to start up the stairs only to have a voice come out of the darkness on the landing above.
Welcome to Fright Night. For real.
Peter almost turns tail and runs right there. Charley grabs him, holding him in place on the staircase, staring up at the vampire looming above them.
Where's Amy?
Up here. All you have to do is get by me.
He starts down the steps. Peter whips out one of the crosses, thrusting at the vampire.
Back, spawn of Satan.
Oh, really?
He reaches out, takes the cross from Peter's hand, and crumples it, contemptuously tossing it aside. He turns back to Peter.
You have to have faith in order for that to work on me, Mr. Vincent.
He starts down the stairs again, Peter backing away, terrified, his nerve completely gone now. Charley steps forward, staring up at Dandridge defiantly. He whips out his cross, thrusting it at the vampire.
Stop!
Jerry stops, staring at the cross. Charley starts up the stairs towards him, the cross held in front of him.
Back!
Jerry backs up the stairs, away from the cross, disappearing into the darkness at the top of the landing. Charley glances back at Peter triumphantly.
We're gonna make it.
Billy Cole suddenly steps out of the darkness in front of him, rips the cross from the boy's hand, and viciously backhands him across the face. With a scream, Charley smashes through the stairway railing, plunging to the hallway floor below. He lands with a solid thud, lying there, groaning. Jerry steps in front of Billy, staring down at Peter on the stairway, smiling at him. Then he slowly starts down the stairs towards Peter. With a scream, the actor whirls, racing down the steps and out the front door. Interior Brewster House portico stairway night. Peter smashes through the front door, yelling up the stairway.
Mrs. Brewster!
No answer! He grabs the phone from the table and punches out a number, speaking hurriedly into it.
Hello. Operator, get me the police. Operator?
No response. Not even a dial tone. He holds the phone up only to see the cord has been ripped from the wall. His eyes widen in horror, his gaze snapping up at the stairs.
Mrs. Brewster.
He plunges up the stairs. Interior master bedroom night. He bursts through the door to see Judy in bed, the back of her head to him, her blonde hair lying across the pillow. He hurries across the room towards her, relief sweeping across his features.
Mrs. Brewster, thank God. All the phones had been ripped from the walls.
He reaches out, turning her over on the bed to face him. Only it isn't Judy. It's Evil Ed wearing one of her wigs.
I know.
So happy for you. He grins up at Peter as he slowly rises, the wig slipping from his head, his features already transformed subtly into those of a vampire. The hair slicked back on his head, the face elongated, two huge white fangs. Jesus Christ, Jen. Two huge white fangs, elongated and slashing over his lower lip. Peter staggers back, staring at him in horror.
Where's Charlie's mother?
Oh, she's working nights, apparently. She left a note for Charley. His dinner's in the oven.
With a scream, Peter whirls and plunges out of the room. Interior hallway night. Peter races down the hallway only to hit a table in the dark, crashing to the floor on the landing, the table splintering beneath him. He sits up, groaning, holding his leg. He suddenly hears a growling, low, deep and vicious, coming from the other end of the hallway. He looks up, staring into the darkness. Suddenly, a huge wolf, as ugly as Evil Ed, tears out of the master bedroom, skidding to a halt, staring back at Peter. Its eyes glow red like hot coals in the dark, saliva dripping from its huge fangs. Peter scrambles to his feet, about to plunge down the stairs, when the terrible snarl, the huge animal bounds down the hall towards him. With a scream, Peter picks up a splintered leg of a table, just as the wolf launches itself into the air towards his jugular vein. He slams the jagged piece of wood into the animal's chest, and then it flies past. Its snapping jaws missing its throat by an inch, the wolf hits the landing railing and plows through it, almost in slow motion, plunging over the side. Interior portico, stairway, night. The wolf tumbles through the air in a blur of fur and fangs, down and down until suddenly Evil Ed smashes into the hardwood floor below with a terrible thud. He lays there, the long wooden splinter buried in his heart. Peter hurries down the stairs, stopping above him and staring down, watching in fascinated horror as humanity leaks back into his eyes, his face transforming into that of a normal teenage boy as he dies. He looks up at Peter with suddenly soft brown eyes.
I'm sorry.
Okay, Travis. He dies, Peter staring down at him, sorrow struck by the waste and horridness of it all. Good job dying, Travis. Good job. You did it. Interior Dandridge house, Jerry's bedroom, night. Jerry comes through the door with Charley over his shoulder and dumps him on the floor a few feet from where Amy lies, curled up in a fetal ball. He nods at Amy as Charley slowly opens his eyes, regaining his senses.
You wanted her? There she is.
Charley glances to his side, sees Amy lying there, and crawls to her. He gently turns her towards him.
Amy.
His words die on his lips. Amy's eyes are clenched shut, her face drenched with sweat, her entire body trembling. Jerry watches his horrid reaction, smiling.
You see, you gave me so much trouble, I thought you deserved a special punishment.
What have you done to her?
Nothing much. Just bit her a little bit, that's all.
Jerry just stares at him silently, leaving no room for the boy to disbelieve him. Charley suddenly leaps for him, furious with rage.
Bastard!
Jerry casually knocks him aside, flinging him through the air against the far wall with his incredible strength. Charley crumples to the floor, stunned. Jerry walks over to him and drops a wooden stake at his feet.
Here. You're gonna need it just before dawn.
Oh, that's fucked. Sorry. With a bow, he lets himself out of the room, closing the door behind him. The key can be heard turning in the lock. Charley stares around for a moment, gathering his senses. He sees the window has been boarded up with plank after plank and nail after nail. It would be impossible for him to rip it apart. Just as it would be impossible for anyone to hear him through it if he were to scream. He crawls to Amy, gently turning her over, only to see that she has already begun to change, her upper lip slipping back as he stares at her, revealing lengthening bicuspids, the beginnings of fangs. Her eyes are black, like bottomless pits. He raises his head and screams, his voice filled with anguish and despair.
No!
Exterior stairway night. Dandridge pauses halfway down the stairs, listening to the agony in Charley's voice as he screams in agony. And it dies away. He smiles, then continues to walk down the stairs. Exterior Dandridge house night. Peter faces the brooding, terrible house, his stake and hammer in either hand, his face set hard with determination. Throwing his shoulders back, he begins to walk slowly towards the front door. Interior portico, hall, night, stairs, night. He slips through the front door, pausing to look down the hall. The basement door is open, the sounds of Jerry and Billy working down there faintly heard. He hurries up the stairs. Interior second floor landing night. He works his way from door to door till he finds the locked one. He rips it away, raps on it lightly, whispering through a crack in the frame.
Charley.
Interior bedroom night. Charley hears a whisper and springs to his feet, hurrying to the door.
Peter?
I'm going to have to break the door down. Make as much noise as you can.
Charley turns to the wall, beating on it and yelling for all he's worth.
Help! Let me out!
Interior basement night. Jerry and Billy are preparing a spare coffin for Amy, dumping dirt into it from the bottom of the huge ornate coffin that Charley saw them carrying into the house on that first night so long ago. They pause in their work as they hear Charley scream, dying away. Jerry smiles at Billy.
I think she just opened her eyes.
Interior room night. Peter hits the door from the outside, snapping the lock, letting himself in and closing it as quietly as he can behind him. He looks around, spotting Amy lying in the corner.
Quick, grab her and let's get out of here.
You can't look.
He falls to his knees beside Amy and rolls her over for Peter to see. She is still covered with sweat and trembling even more violently now. Her upper lip slips back, revealing lengthening fangs just the beginning of the red in her iris. Peter's eyes widen in horror. Interior basement night. Jerry pauses in his labor to stare up at the ceiling in direction of the bedroom 2 floors above, his ear cocked. Billy looks at him.
Something wrong?
Yes. We have a visitor.
He puts down his shovel, heading for the stairs, Billy following him. Interior bedroom night. Charley glances up from Amy's trembling body to look at Peter.
Is it too late to save her?
Not if we kill Dandridge before dawn.
Exterior side of Dandridge house night. Subjective camera cranes up off a basement window, up the side of the house, past the living room window, and up, and up. The voices in Jerry's bedroom getting louder and louder as Jerry approaches.
Sure.
So far, everything's just like in the movies. We'll just have to keep on hoping.
And the camera stops outside the bedroom window, watching as Charley grabs the stake Dandridge dropped on the floor and heads for the door.
Let's go.
He and Peter hurry out the door, and the camera watching them go. Interior second floor landing stairway night. They come out of the bedroom and start down the steps, only to find themselves facing Billy Cole coming up the other way. They freeze as Billy stops, a slow smile sliding across his grim features.
Well, what do we have here?
He starts up the steps. Peter pulls a pistol, one of the props from his apartment, from his pocket.
Stop, or I'll shoot.
Billy stops, still smiling at him, their eyes locked for what seems like an eternity. Then Billy starts up the stairs towards him again. Peter points the gun at Billy with trembling hands.
I mean it. Don't force me to shoot.
Billy reaches out his huge hands for Peter's throat. Peter fires the bullet, punching a neat hole through Billy's forehead. The large man freezes, his eyes rolling back in his skull. He stands there for a moment and then tumbles backward down the stairs, landing with a crash at the bottom. Suddenly, there is the sound of approaching footsteps on the balcony above. Peter and Charley whirl, staring up at the landing above them. A second later, Jerry Dandridge steps out of the shadows. With a smile, he starts down the stairs towards them. Charley steps forward, thrusting his cross up at Dandridge.
Stop!
Dandridge freezes, his face darkening with fury. Charley starts up the steps, Peter close behind them.
Come on, we have him.
Dandridge's gaze snaps past Charley's shoulder, down into the shadows of the bottom of the stairs where Billy's body lies, his eyes glowing as they burn into the corpse for a moment before shifting back to Charley and Peter. He smiles at the boy.
Do you?
He steps back into Amy's room, disappearing from sight. Peter looks at Charley.
What do you mean?
Nothing. He's just bluffing.
Charley continues up the stairs slowly, the cross held out in front of him, Peter hugging his back. Behind them, down at the foot of the stairs, Billy slowly sits up. Peter and Charley continue climbing, their gazes fixed ahead. Behind them, Billy stands up and starts to walk up the stairs toward them. His first step he hits groaning under his heavy weight. Charley and Peter freeze, turning to look back. They see the huge man coming up the stairs towards them, a thin trail of blood leaking from the bullet hole in his forehead. Peter whips his pistol out with trembling hands and unloads the entire revolver into the man, casting a pale of gun smoke in front of him and Charley, obscuring their view of the stairway below. Suddenly, Billy Cole appears through the thick cloud, backing them up into the stairs. Peter stumbles, falling backward, unable to rise in time. Billy leans down, grabbing him and jerking him into the air like a rag doll, about to fling him over the balustrade to the floor far down below. Charley suddenly leaps forward, slamming his stake into the creature's heart.
No!
Billy Cole freezes, his eyes widening. He drops Peter, crashing to the steps, and staggers back, grabbing the rail for support, hanging there below Peter and Charley for what seems like an eternity, the stake protruding from his heart. As the two watch in horror, Cole's face slowly begins to dissolve, skin putrefying and slipping away, revealing the grinning skull beneath, the process of dissolution accelerating as the seconds tick past. Suddenly, the legs turn to bone, and what remains of the body, no more than a skeleton enclosed now, tumbles backward down the stairs with a clatter, to land in a crash on the floor below, bones rolling in every direction across the portico. They stare down the stairs at the remains.
Wasn't human.
Oh, he certainly wasn't.
Peter scrambles to his feet, he and Charley backing hurriedly up the stairs, terrified by what they've seen. Interior Amy's room, night. They rush into Amy's room, Peter stopping to stare at the open window, left that way by Dandridge when he entered and left. Charley ignores it, hurrying to Amy and kneeling by her side. He gently turns her over to expose lengthening bicuspids as Peter sticks his head out the window. Her irises are now more red than before, signaling that the transition she is making from the living to the walking dead. Exterior Jerry's window, side of the house, night. Peter glances down, searching for Jerry above him, clinging flat to the wall like a fly. Is Jerry. The vampire smiles, slowly drawing back his clawed hand to tear Peter's throat out when the man cranes his neck to look over his shoulder. He is just about to, when Charley calls to him from the room within.
Peter!
Peter ducks just in time as Jerry's about to strike. Interior Jerry's room, night. Charley looks up from Amy's unconscious body at Peter.
She's worse. Come on, we're running out of time.
The two men rush out of the room. Exterior Jerry's window, side of the house, night. The subjective camera does a 180-degree turn, staring through the window, out the open door into the balcony. Jerry sees Peter and Charley standing out there, hears their voices.
Where is he?
The camera begins to drift up the side of the house towards the attic window above. Interior second floor landing, night. Charley and Peter there, staring about. Suddenly, they hear footsteps on the floor above. They stare up at the ceiling.
He's in the attic.
They rush to the attic door, the two men disappearing up the dark stairs. Interior attic, night. They come up the staircase to find themselves enclosed in darkness. Peter pulls out a flashlight and flicks it on, shining it about the musty, filthy room. He pauses as rats scatter beneath the unexpected blaze. He continues to search with the flashlight, picking out the remains of a ruined window at the far end, the glass shattered, the window itself flung wide open.
Well, he was here.
The beam moves away, only to suddenly stop on a large chest shoved in a corner.
There, his coffin.
Both of them approach, staring down at the long chest. Peter hands the flashlight to Charley, pulling a stake from his pocket, the hammer ready from his belt. He raises the stake in the air, and the hammer is ready. He nods at the coffin.
Open it.
Charley throws his shoulder against the lid, heaving. The lid opens with a groan. Peter is about to stab down, only to find it empty.
God damn him. Where is he?
Exterior attic window, side of house, night. The subjective camera stares at them, then slowly begins to drift up the side of the house towards the roof above. Exterior roof, night. The camera goes up onto the roof and down around the chimney, to only discover that Jerry is sitting there as though he's just alighted. Interior attic, night. Charley and Peter stare up at the beams overhead as dust trickles down. The thud of Jerry landing above them on the roof, still loud in their ears.
Now we know where he is.
Yeah. What's he doing up there?
Exterior Dandridge house roof, night. Jerry sits on the roof, squatting there like some huge nocturnal bird of prey, his eyes closed, his lips moving in a whisper. Interior bedroom, night. Amy lies on the floor, hardly moving now. Suddenly she groans and rolls over, throwing a hand over her face as though trying to ward off some particularly terrible nightmare. Exterior roof, night. Dandridge's face darkens even more in concentration.
Amy, awake. I command you to awake.
Interior bedroom night. Amy's eyes slowly open. There's not a vestige of human life in them. She blinks and her eyes go completely red, glowing in the dark. Dandridge's voice fills her mind like distant thunder.
Now show me how much you love me, Amy. Kill them both.
She rises and moves like a zombie messenger of death towards the door, to the hallway and the attic above. Interior attic night. Charley and Peter are still staring up at the attic ceiling above, the waiting becoming unendurable for Charley.
I'm going up there.
He heads up for the open window at the far end of the attic nearest the stairs.
Charley!
He takes a step after the boy, but he's too late. Charley is already out the window. Exterior roof night. Charley climbs onto the roof, a cross in his hand, a stake in the other. The roof looks deserted, but hidden behind the chimney stands Jerry, waiting for the boy. Unaware of the danger, Charley reaches the chimney and stealthily begins to circle it. Sensing danger, the cross and stake in his hand, he suddenly reaches the side where we last saw Jerry, only to find no one there. He stands there puzzled, looking around.
Do you see him?
Nope.
Interior attic night. Peter stands alone at the far end next to the coffin, nervously talking to himself.
Where the hell is he?
And in the window directly behind his back, Jerry rises up out of the dark, and no more than a few feet away, only a thin pane of glass to separate Peter from his clawed hand. He raises it to strike through the glass at Peter, just as Charley slides in the open window at the far end from the roof and sees Jerry in the window behind Peter. He screams out,
Peter, behind you!
Peter whirls, holding up his cross, and as quickly as he appeared from the night, Jerry slips back into it, leaving Peter staring at the window, terrified at the close call as Charley reaches his side.
You okay?
Peter nods numbly as a huge shadow rises up along the staircase wall at the far end of the attic behind them, a shadow that suggests that Jerry is coming up the stairs from the floor below toward them. A stair creaks behind them, and Charley and Peter whirl to see Amy step out of the stairwell. She looks incredibly beautiful, as though somehow her moment with Dandridge has transformed her from virginal girl to full-grown woman. Woman, dripping with sensuality. Charley steps forward, about to rush into her arms.
Amy.
No.
Don't do it! Charley looks at Amy as she clears the steps and turns towards them. Peter shines his flashlight into her face. The eyes glow red, the face lifeless, fangs larger now than before protruding from her upper lip.
Oh, God.
Suddenly they hear Dandridge cruelly laughing at them from the floor below. Laughing like this is the best joke he's ever heard.
Downstairs now.
Amy suddenly launches herself at Charley, seizing him by the throat and throwing him to the floor. Landing on top of him, he grabs her by the shoulders, holding her back as she tries to plunge her fangs into his neck. Peter steps up behind her, a stake raised in his hands, about to plunge it into her back. Charley screams up at him.
No!
Peter shifts his grip on the stake, holding it like a club, and brings it slamming down on her back. She collapses unconscious on top of Charley. He shoves her off, climbing to his feet and turning toward the staircase to the floor below.
Come on.
The two men plunge down the stairs. A second later, Amy rolls over, her eyes snapping open. Perfectly conscious again, she slowly rises. Interior second floor landing, portico, stairs, night. The two men come out of the stairway, Peter turning back to lock the attic door behind them. Charley starts for Jerry's room. Peter grabs him.
You take downstairs, I'll take up here.
Charley plunges down the stairs to the portico below before Peter disappears into the bedroom, searching for Dandridge. Exterior house, Jerry's bedroom window, night. The subjective camera watches as Charley heads down the stairs, Peter turning for Jerry's room, the camera craning off the window and down around the side of the house, picking up Charley as through the front windows as the boy disappears down the first floor hall in search of Jerry. Jerry watches him the entire time from the outside of the house. Interior house, portico, night. The front door slowly begins to open, that strange killing hand of Jerry holding the doorknob, all that's seen of him as he obviously prepares to slip inside. Interior Jerry's bedroom, night. Peter freezes as he hears the front door creak and turns, racing out the bedroom door onto the balcony. Interior second floor balcony, night. Peter comes to a halt at the top of the stairs, peering down at the portico below. No Charley. He calls out, panic struck.
Charley!
Charley comes running down the hall, stopping at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at Peter.
What is it?
I thought I heard something.
Exterior front of house, night. The subjective camera stares in at them, then starts to move across the porch and up the side of the house as Charley speaks to Peter.
What?
The camera passes Jerry's bedroom window, catching a glimpse of Peter on the balcony just as he replies to Charley.
I don't know. Just my nerves, I guess.
Interior house, second floor balcony, night. Behind Peter, there is suddenly a pounding at the attic door. It's Amy trying to get out. Peter stares worriedly at the attic door as the pounding from within becomes more violent. Suddenly, all the clocks on the wall below go off, signaling that it's 6 a.m., dawn. Time for Jerry to go to bed. Peter takes his eyes off the clocks as the last chime dies, looking at Charley over the balustrade.
Keep searching for him. He's got to be close. It's almost dawn.
Charley heads back down the hallway toward the basement. As above on the landing, Peter stares around to try another door when suddenly the huge stained glass window directly behind and above him bursts apart in an explosion of shattering glass, and Jerry Dandridge plunges in from the outside, landing in a crouch before Peter. Come on, Superman, superhero landing, whatever. He rises as the older man backs away. Charley rushes down the hall back into the portico, brought about by the sound of the crash. He's about to start up the stairs when Dandridge turns and stares down at him. Charley ignores him, starting up the stairs. Peter speaks to him, never taking his gaze from Dandridge.
Stay there, Charley.
Charley freezes, staring up at the vampire and at the man above, watching, waiting. Dandridge's gaze bores into Peter.
So, just the two of us at last.
He takes a step for Peter. Peter whips out a cross, thrusting it at him. Dandridge stops, smiling at him. He starts for him again, Peter holding his ground, the cross thrust out in front of him.
Back!
You have to have faith for that to work, Mr. Vincent. Remember?
Peter continues to hold his ground, the cross held up higher, staring defiantly back at Dandridge, refusing to drop his gaze. And then, it happens. The vampire jerks to a halt, staring with slowly dawning fury at Peter, realizing that whatever invisible force it is emanating from that cross, that indeed Peter has recovered his faith. He stands there, stymied, snarling at the man. Peter peers over his shoulder out the ruined window. On the horizon, the first pink tendrils of dawn are breaking. Now it's Peter's turn to smile as he shifts his gaze toward back to Dandridge.
Look over your shoulder.
Dandridge cranes his neck to see the rising dawn through the open window, the sun beginning to glint its golden rays even as he stares at it. He turns back to Peter, roaring with fury.
No!
Peter picks up his stake and dives for the vampire, but Dandridge is too quick for him. He throws himself off the landing, tucking his body into a somersault as he hurls through the air toward the portico floor below him, turning into a whirling ball of spinning flesh, only to emerge suddenly from it no longer a man, but now an enormous bat. The bat straightens in midair above the portico and zooms down the hallway, smashing into Charley chest high, blowing him off his feet, and his claws rake the sending two bloody furrows down his chest as the bat whips past him and disappears down the hallway into the darkness. Peter recovers above, hurrying down the stairs to the portico below. He rushes to Charley's side, helping the badly shaken boy to his feet.
Are you all right?
Yes.
Amy begins pounding at the attic door above again. The two men look up as it begins to splinter.
Quick, he's in the basement.
He helps the boy down the hall, the two of them disappearing through the basement door. A second later, the attic door above rips from its hinges, crashing into the floor. Amy steps out of the attic, her eyes sightless, a stake grasped in her hand. She walks like an automaton down the stairway toward the portico below. Interior basement, dawn. Charley and Peter hurry down the stairs into the dark room, its windows covered with blackout drapes. The floor is a mass of antiques, row after row of them, many covered with dust cloths. Peter dives for the first one, ripping the cloth off only to discover an armoire. He rushes to the next one.
Quick, his coffin has to be here somewhere.
They race down the aisle, continuing to rip dust covers away, only to discover a line of mirrors, several of them obviously removed from pieces in the house above. They stop and stare at them.
Well, now we know what he did with the mirrors.
The door to the stairway creaks open behind them, lost somewhere in the dark. Peter whirls, looking back the way they just came.
What was that?
Keep searching. I'll check it out.
Charley!
But Charley has disappeared into the darkness before Peter can stop him. Charley appears down the row of antiques, stopping at the foot of the stairs and staring up at the basement door above. It is partially open, allowing just a sliver of light into the darkness. He calls out, clutching his stake nervously.
Who's there?
Amy approaches out of the darkness behind him, slowly approaching, her face deathly white, her lips blood red, her eyes almost glowing in the dark. He hears her at the last second, whirling to face her with a gasp. She reads the fear on his face and stares and smiles sadly, reaching out a hand to him.
Don't be frightened, Charley.
She takes a step closer, and he steps away. Amy stops, staring at him. Then she slowly begins to advance on him, unbuttoning her blouse, a voice a husky, purring whisper.
Charley, I love you. What's wrong, Charley? Don't you want me anymore?
He suddenly breaks her spell, coming to his senses and whipping out his cross, thrusting it in her face. She whirls away with a snarl, burying her face in her hands, softly beginning to weep.
It's not my fault, Charley. You promised you wouldn't let him get me. You promised.
He stares at her, guilt boiling up inside of him. He steps forward, touching her shoulder, letting the cross drop to his side.
Amy.
She whirls, huge flames flashing, dripping hungrily with hungry saliva, and she dives for his exposed throat. He whips the cross up, but not in time, her forearm smashing into his wrist. Sending the cross whirling away into the darkness. Amy straightens, smiling at him, the huge fangs sparkling in the light from the doorway open above. She begins to walk towards him, her sexual interest in Charley gone, replaced by mad, driving hunger. At the other end of the room, Peter desperately weaves his way among the pieces of the furniture dotting the floor, looking for the coffin. He stops before a large armoire, whips it open to discover, whips it down to discover it's empty, and is about to move on when he glances down. There, at the corner of the armoire, is a small hole with rats scurrying in and out. Realizing something must be behind the huge piece of furniture, he shoves it aside, toppling it as it crashes to the floor. A hidden alcove, more a daze than something else, is revealed. A huge window at the back covered with a blackout curtain, and Jerry's ornate brass-bound coffin sitting in the middle, covered with chattering, crawling rats. Peter stares at it, horrified, calling out into the darkness behind him.
Charley, I found it.
Back at the other end of the room, Charley is backing away from Amy as she slowly stalks him. She the stake that he picked up in the attic in her hands. Charley yells back at Peter.
Get it open!
She suddenly leaps for him, stabbing with the stake only to miss him by inches, sending it plunging through the back of a chair with her growing strength, shattering it against the stone wall behind the chair. She turns on Charley, empty-handed now, continuing to stalk him. Before the daze, Peter stifles his revulsion of the rats and leaps forward, rushing to the side of the coffin and fumbling with the clasps only to discover they're locked. He cries out again!
He's locked it somehow from the inside.
He grabs a hammer from his pocket and starts pounding at the clasps, trying to free them while at the side of the room, Charley continues to back away from Amy, calling back.
Hurry!
He goes to dodge Amy when she leaps forward, shoving a bureau across his path, blocking his escape. She smiles at him, continuing to back him into a corner. Back at the coffin, the clasp finally comes loose beneath Peter's pounding, and he moves to the next one, smashing it with the hammer and desperately. Back at the side of the room, Charley dodges Amy, leaping over a pile of refuse in his desperation to escape, the girl vampire diving after him, her fingers clawing into his back and shredding into his shirt as he twists out of her grip. Back at the dais, Peter breaks the last clasps and throws the coffin lid open, sees Jerry resting beneath him. The king vampire's eyes close. He fumbles a spare stake from his belt, pressing it to the creature's heart, about to slam it home with the hammer when suddenly behind him, Charley crashes into view on the floor. Amy fixed onto his back, rising over him, struggling to sink her fangs into his neck. Peter whirls at the noise, momentarily distracted. In the coffin, Jerry's eyes snap open, fixing on Peter. With a snarl, he sits right up in the coffin to behind Peter and the man, turning back only to find himself face to face with the enraged vampire. Jerry opens his mouth, about to kill him, when Peter slams it home, missing his heart, but impaling his shoulder. The old actor falls back as the vampire rises out of his coffin, the stake protruding from his shoulder, Amy stopping in her struggle to kill Charley, both she and the boy staring up at the huge vampire looming over all three. With superhuman deliberation, Dandridge pulls the stake from his chest and hurls it away. It smashes into a far wall, splintering a window, sending a thin ray of light into the room. Dandridge turns on Peter, his face convulsed with hatred. He leaps for him, smashing him into a wall, about to sink his fangs into Peter's neck as Charley watches.
No!
He desperately leaps around Amy, reaching for the blackout curtain covering the window at the back of the dais. She jumps after him, grabbing him just as his fingers close around the curtain. She pulls him to the floor, her mouth open, about to sink her fangs into him as the drape comes with him, tearing from the window and sending a huge bolt of sunlight streaming into the dank room. It hits Jerry Dandridge squarely in the back, whirling him away from Peter, picking him up and throwing him across the room, slamming him into the far wall, pinning him there while several feet above the floor. He writhes in the golden beam, twisting this way and that, but unable to escape as his body slowly begins to smolder. A million small fires breaking out all over him as he begins to burn.
No!
Yep. As Peter and Charley watch, unable to tear their eyes away, the vampire's body suddenly explodes, yes, in a whooshing ball of flame that incinerates him instantly, leaving nothing behind but the echoing scream of a soul finally going to hell. Amy rolls off of Charley, moaning. He turns to her.
Amy.
She slowly opens her eyes, the girl he knew staring back at him, her fangs gone. She throws herself in his arms, weeping softly. He holds her close, staring across the room at Peter, who sits beside the coffin, wiping Dandridge's blood from his face and mouth with his handkerchief. Nothing but silence in the room now, the sun shining merrily through the window. Only a few wisps of charcoal floating lazily through the air to remind any of them what just happened. Dissolved to exterior Dandridge and Brewster house night. The Dandridge house is dark, a for sale sign prominently displayed on the front lawn. The house itself now seems innocuous and ordinary, free of forever of the evil that once dwelt within. The Brewster house next door is lit and gay, as much as it was on the first night as we saw it. The TV can be heard coming from the house.
And now, Fright Night starring Peter Vincent.
Interior Charley's bedroom night. Charley and Amy lay on his bed, making out like crazy. The TV just turned into Fright Night, just as it was the first evening we met them. They break for a moment as Peter Vincent comes up on the screen.
This is Peter Vincent, once more back with you as host of Fright Night. I thought I'd let the vampires rest for a little while. Right, Charley? Tonight the threat comes not from beyond the grave, but from beyond the stars, as alien beings stalk an unwary summer camp in Mars Wants Flesh. I do not star in it.
Amy turns back to Charley, the two of them staring at each other, obviously deeply in love. Then she slowly begins to undress. Smiling, he rises, inadvertently turning to his window as he takes his shirt off, much as he did the first night. He freezes. There in Jerry's window, looking back at him, are a pair of red, glowing eyes. Charley blinks. He looks at the window again. The eyes are gone. Behind him, Amy looks at him questioningly. questioningly.
Charley, is something wrong?
With a quizzical shake of his head, Charley slams the window shut and turns to her.
No, nothing.
He jumps into bed with her, the two of them beginning to make love as the camera pans off them to the window, pushing out through the window, closing in on Jerry's window. Across the way, a pair of red eyes stand there in the darkness, staring and staring as the camera moves closer and closer. They blink. They're for real! There is another vampire out there, and he is watching Charley. Fade out. The end.
Well, thank you all very much for joining on this one. A little early for the spooky season, but why not? Hope you're having a great night. And we'll see you at the next one.